Right. Morning, everyone. Morning. What a beautiful day. So, welcome to the first Strategy and Resources Committee meeting. And we will start off by apologies for apps. We are being recorded. The meeting is being recorded. So please be aware that this public can join us and the press can join us. So it's all being recorded live. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, apologies for absence for Councillor Wilkinson.
Councillor Wilkinson is working. Item 2, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on 6th of March 2023.
I'd like to move those, please.
Thank you. Councillor Warning. Have you a second there? Councillor Knight or Councillor Martin Prowse. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations of interest? Councillor Maskell?
A declaration of interest on the holiday letting.
Holiday lettings. So that's item 8, I believe, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, item 8.
I think I'm here to be fair, personal interest. I'll make me as well. Short term, that's enough.
Right, Councillor Lane, short term lets.
Thank you.
Yeah. And myself and Councillor Bell will just declare any interest where it mentions NHS, just as a personal one, really. But we've got no other specific interest. Item 5, to agree the agenda between Part A and Part B. Yeah. Okay. So Part A, Ilfracombe Harbour Sea Water Pool, pages 21 to 34 in your report. And we have the report by Ilfracombe Harbour Master. And
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that one.
Mr. Triggs is going to take that one.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, members. And this report is a proposed project at Ilfracombe Harbour to create a sea water pool. The pier was constructed in 1999, which was replacing the old dilapidated Woodley pier, and an area was left enclosed but derelict that sits behind where Verity statue currently sits. This seawater pool project is to convert that derelict area into a retained seawater pool and clear the floor of the old leftover pier construction debris that was left in there to excavate an area to deeper depth. The rationale behind the project is to regenerate this area from a wider range of activities and enhance the asset of Ilfracombe Harbour. In terms of the project itself, the Harbour Master has engaged with a contractor and the project would install safe access and egress, providing life-saving devices, implement clear and concise signage, and create the retained deeper sea pool. And creating this facility would benefit the cold water swimming clubs, local diving clubs, and commercial dive training providers. It would also benefit the local and wider community and also our valued visitors to the area. In terms of the opportunities within the pool, the Harbour Master would wish to develop a range of training opportunities which fulfil the needs of the blue marine sector, utilising the pool to conduct sea survival training, which would also benefit the local commercial dive training centres to provide their requirements. It would enable local dive businesses and clubs to deliver their introductory and intermediate controlled dive training, and also put Ilfracombe on the map of the diving venue within the southwest. Those activities would need to be pre-booked so that the harbour team can limit numbers for safety reasons, and also the businesses would be licensed to utilise the pool to ensure that they carried out their own risk assessments for their activities, and also that they hold separate and appropriate insurance for the activities they wish to deliver there. This would enable to be able to deliver sea survival courses, and there's also the potential to run the sea fish training course that would enable our local fishermen to train within the facility as well. The commercial operators who would utilise the pool would also pay the Harbour Authority a fee, so therefore it would also generate some revenue stream into the authority as well. It would also be open to all harbour users as a safer area to swim, and would enable the Harbour Authority to better manage the whole harbour area itself and give an alternative for swimming in the actual harbour, which actually is against harbour bylaws, but unfortunately does take place at the moment, and it causes a demanding impact on the harbour master and also the PCSO that was based at the harbour in the last 12 months. In terms of managing the facility, advice has been sought from our insurers, Zurich, who have confirmed the liability cover would operate as long as the area has been fully risk assessed, regularly inspected, and also managed by the harbour team. The pool, if approved, would be integrated within the harbour's marine safety management system, which shows and also shows that the pool's infrastructure is included on daily safety rounds and also is covered by the existing CCTV that is in place, together with emergency life-saving equipment we provided within close proximity of the sea waterfall. Appendices A on your report on pages 27 and 28 show the risk assessment that has been carried out by the harbour master. Obviously, the sea waterfall is dependent on tidal ranges, with obviously the tide coming in, going out. Due to the tidal range in the area, once the sea water overtops the wall, the pool would then become unusable, and clear signage will be in place to this effect to guide users in terms of safety mechanisms in place. At all other times, access ladders will be chained across and signage posted to state the seawater is closed under these conditions. Appendix D within your report on pages 33 and 34 just shows some visuals of how the water currently overtops the harbour infrastructure. As experienced in lots of harbour areas, jumping from height, which is often known as tombstoning, is not and will not be condoned within the harbour jurisdiction. And clear signage will be in place within the seawater pool and surrounding areas to convey this. We have sought external advice in terms of whether a harbour revision order is required for the project, and it's been confirmed that that isn't required. However, a works licence for the installation of the access ladders is required, and that has been granted by the MMO, who are the Marine Management Organisation. If approved today, members, the approved contractor is a company called TMS, who are called Timbers Maritime Services. They are a specialist marine contractor with considerable experience in installations of this nature. In terms of funding for the project, the total cost is around 24,000 for the excavation works and the installation of the safety infrastructure. We've been successful in obtaining a grant through Devon County Council through their renewal quick win project. That money has been received and has been banked and is really for allocation to this project if members are mindful to approve, together with a small amount of underspend within the harbour budget, which the harbour master has ring-fenced in a reserve towards this project. So members, that covers the project. I'm happy to take questions. Chair, the recommendations are on 2.1 on page 21 of your report, and hand over to members for any questions. Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, I know this is some of your first meetings that you've attended at the committee stage. So to ensure those attending virtually and in person can hear the proceedings and for the recording to capture the entire meeting, please ensure that you project your voice and speak clearly. And could you state your name, where Councillor Ian Room or whoever you are, so that officers can identify you as well, because it might be the first time that some officers have actually met some of the new councillors. Thank you very much indeed. And make sure your mobile phones are on silent. I've got to say that earlier. Any questions? Councillor Lever.
Thanks very much, Councillor Peter Lever. I understand that it's going to be available for commercial operators to let, and then also for the public to use. And I've also noticed that in the risk assessment, a lot of those elements come out at quite high risk. And I just wanted to make sure that the insurers, our insurers, are aware that, you know, having done a risk assessment, we're coming out at high risk. Are there measures in place to manage public use of the pool when you've got commercial operators in there as well? So I understand there isn't going to be a lifeguard on duty.
That's correct, yeah. Our insurers have seen sites of the risk assessment and are comfortable with the proposals that are in place, and the harbour master has run that all through them. In terms of management, obviously when commercial operators are using it and the area is licensed, obviously that will be managed through the harbour team who are on site. So when those activities are taking place, depending on the size of that activity, then obviously availability to general public will be managed through the harbour team. If it's obviously a bigger operation from the commercial operation, then obviously access to the public will obviously be limited, and that will be managed through Georgina and the team.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Councillor Clark.
So,
Hey, what good? I'm psychic. What a genius. I won't say that in 2 years' time. No, the only thing I brought up at the meeting previously was the fact that has somebody looked at the strength of the concrete and are we content with that? That's the only thing. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. Let's crack on and do it. But that's been looked at.
Okay, so, both our internal senior engineer, and also Nick Mills, Craddy's engineers, who are marine structural engineers, have inspected each face, as there was a concern about a crack that was obviously within the concrete structure. That was actually a poor defect, and they both have confirmed there's no concern about the structural integrity of the face itself. So, yeah, following your earlier question, that has been looked into.
Councillor.
Malcolm Price, councillor Price, you can say, he said. Yeah, can I second your proposal? It's like going back a generation or two, swimming in seawater again. I think it's a great idea. It's just what Ilfracombe needs. And now we've got the water sports centre, we've got attractions all the way around the whole of the harbour area, both sides, it's a proper day out now in the town. Like super, second.
Right, members, the proposal is, Councillor Knight.
Yeah, Councillor Knight, simply a point of information, what does Ashford PP LLP mean?
Ashford's a firm of external solicitors,
Ashford.
who we've engaged some.
Ashford, the ward, okay.
Very, very valuable.
Yeah,
That's a new name for the new parish council.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just add also just on that same point in terms of external solicitor advice, before we obviously go live, we will make sure that all of our legal obligations in terms of managing a seawater pool have taken place to make sure that all obligations on the authority have been mitigated and managed before we go live with the facility.
Yeah.
Chair.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowden. Just with regards to the high risk that is involved here, the Ilfracombe MIU at the Tyrrell is frequently closed because of staffing and has problems over the last couple of years. Transit time for NGH from Ilfracombe is quite long. Has Zurich taken that into account?
They have, obviously, we've obviously engaged with Zurich in terms of what the on offer. Don't think they've got to the nth degree in terms of looking at staffing across sort of the NHS in terms of activity, but obviously there is heightened activity already in the harbour, and similarly obviously got the water sports centre opening as well. So there is going to be obviously increased activity within the harbour following those implementation of those structures. So Zurich obviously have understood the whole harbour infrastructure and what's on offer, and they're confident in terms of what's going to be on offer. There are people already swimming in the harbour jurisdiction already. Often in front of the operator boats, the operator boats coming in and out offering visitor experiences. They often have to navigate around people swimming in the harbour, which actually shouldn't happen anyway. So if anything, this hopefully reduces that risk, albeit there is still a risk obviously with the seawater borders and traps.
Thank you. Councillor Warden.
Councillor David Warden. Just to say that because of all the reassurances that we've received, I'm actually fully in favour of this, particularly as it's not actually going to cost the council very much money, which it is great that we're getting an extra facility for Ilfracombe. It's really good that we're having a water sports centre and so on. And this will sort of finish off, if you like, that part of the harbour area. So I'm fully in favour of us going ahead with this.
Councillor Lane.
Yeah, Councillor Lane, you talk about the closing of some of the holes and that, when it lets the water out and then tide goes back. I'm just wondering what's being dealt with regarding changing the water, because if you are, from time to time, you've got to change the water or something like that. So I mean, this one, what provisions being done for that? Because quite honestly, we're looking at the old, which is actually keeping the water in there.
Yes. I think it allows for those holes to be opened, so there is some form of mechanism to then release the water, so there is that water will be changed. Obviously, the water goes top and over as well, so new seawater is coming out, so it is obviously circulating with obviously the water overtopping the existing structure. So there is a form of circulation already in place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Knight?
Second by councillor Knight, Ricky Knight, not David, I presume. Second by the chair, you can see how excited I am to be on this committee. Tombstoning, not a good idea, it's true, but what about the Birdman, that annual jamboree? Can they go ahead still and do what they do?
Absolutely, I mean, that's a separate licensed activity.
Absolutely, so it can be done.
It's all done and controlled in accordance with risk assessments and safety infrastructure in place. So we make sure that that's not just happening with all the other operation on a day-to-day basis. So the Birdman activity will still proceed, subject to application coming forward.
Thank you. I'm putting you forward. So the recommendation. Thanks, Ricky. So the recommendations are that members approve the outline project to convert the identified area into a retained seawater pool to be funded as outlined in section 5.2 of your reports. It's been proposed by Councillor Crabb, seconded by Councillor Krause. Jolly good idea for Ilfracombe in my view, and I think it's an extra facility that will enhance the area and the sea frontage, and also importantly make it safe, because I have seen people in there already, and I think by having the ladders there and other safety equipment in situ, it will be a lot safer. So members, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. We move on to item 7, which is the site at Southview, Bratton Fleming, pages 35 to 42. Report by Mr. Triggs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And this is a report from our property team. The site at Southview, Bratton Fleming, was a site of a surplus asset that was disposed back in 2014 by a public auction. At that time, there were a number of small surplus sites that the authority said were useful, and these were taken to public auction. The council received just over £12,000 for the sites. However, there was an overage provision put in place that's obviously subject to any future development. If that land value had an uplift, then the council would receive a proportion of that uplift in land value. In 2017, the original purchaser sold that site to another party, the current owner, and the council would receive an overage payment of just under £13,000 in addition to the original sale value. The existing owner, known as Mr. B, within the report, purchased the plot back in 2018, but at that stage there was no further uplift in land value and therefore no further overage due to the authority. And the current owner was building the property out himself. However, the plot doesn't have vehicular access. It was previously a garden area that was obviously then sold off as a surplus asset. The current owner has requested the council permit vehicular access across a grassed area to enable him to then market and sell the property, and also requested a final payment made to the council to terminate that existing overage provision in place. Overall, the site would have achieved just under £18,000 in overage payments, as well as the original sale value of £12,250. Once the property has been completed, it will have a life in excess of 30 years, which was the length of the overage provision that was in place, and that will represent the most substantive development of the site based on the build costs, and therefore no further uplift in value. We have sought external advice in terms of valuation, and a payment of £50,000 being put forward as a right to create the vehicular access is deemed to represent a fair proportion of the uplift in the finished house value with the vehicular access and parking in place. The overage that was put in place only relates to the uplift in land value and doesn't directly relate to the value of the finished property that was in place. And it was in place to ensure that any uplift in value due to that development was recognised and subsequently paid to the council. That deed of restricted covenant that was put in place for 30 years recognised that there potentially would be a hope value should that development actually take place within that period. As I've outlined, obviously, we have received overage payments over the last few years in relation to this. And the last purchase in 2018, there was no further uplift in land value at that time of the transaction. The site plan that is shown in your report on page 37 sets out the plot, and this was previously a garden licensed to the adjacent property. There's no parking directly linked to the property, and parking takes place alongside the adjacent property currently. It's of the property team found that even if a small extension was added to the property that's being proposed, bearing in mind current build costs, it's unlikely to result in any further uplift in land value over the next 30 years. Therefore, we feel that all overage has been exhausted and received on this piece of land that's in place. As set out within your recommendations, the current owner has offered £5,000 to release the overage within the deed. There is no further hope value to be released on this site of land. Leaving the overage in place is likely to actually depress the value for the remaining term until 2034, which wasn't the original intention of the provision that the council put in place. Construction of the property has started, and the property is on the open market, and the house is being marketed in the region of 600,000. An external valuation that was carried out values the property without parking at 525, therefore the difference being 75,000. The matter of this access has been considered therefore as a separate issue, and the proposed payment to the council of £50,000 for the right to this access is deemed to be a fair proportion of the uplift in value having that access in place. A separate statement from the owner is shown in Appendix A within your report. The proposed access would run adjacent to the eastern boundary of the site, as indicated on the red line on the plan. Just for your clarity, that area is not formal public open space. Officers have consulted with the 7 neighbours within South View and also the local parish council through the ward member. Similar access has been offered to those neighbours, but no one at this time wished to take up that offer. Of those 7 neighbours consulted, 4 responded, 2 in favour of granting the parking access and 2 objecting. Those responses are available for members if they would like to see them on full request. By granting the owner of the site this vehicle access, it does reduce demand for the existing parking area and provide spaces for other residents. The current owner would need to apply for planning permission to provide the parking and access area, and any member approval related to this matter would not prejudice that planning application. In terms of the financial considerations, therefore, there would be a capital receipt of £55,000 relating to £50,000 to grant the vehicle access and £5,000 in releasing the overage clause. And Chair, the recommendations are in 2.1 to 2.3 on page 35 of your report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I'll go over to the ward member, Councillor Prowse.
Thank you, Chair. Back at the time of the transfer to North Devon Homes, we as a council retained this green area, and we still own the road, and we still own the green area and the parking. But now I think there's just 2 council houses and 5 privately owned houses in the East South View at the top. I think this is a great deal. We have tried to put a lot of effort in trying to find a way of perhaps enhancing the existing facilities for the other owners, and looking at whether they could get vehicular access across, so it just became too complicated. So this is a very simple deal. It's only a right of way across the green, because the areas of land to the north and to the east are in public ownership, some by the county council and some by the parish council. So we have been able to retain the ability to get to those bits of land in the future if need be. But I think it's a really good deal. The neighbours are never going to agree, and I've worked hard with them to try to find an agreed solution. But this is good. It's a good capital receipt. I did mention to the chief executive that perhaps there might be a bid on it one day. He said, no, you can't ring fence it. So anyway, so Bratton are very happy. Bratton are very happy to help the capital receipts of this authority, unlike a lot of other wards in the district. So I mean, if you're happy, Chair, I would move the recommendation. And can I just say thank you to Helen and her team, or teams, because this has been going on a long time. You know, and it is a good result. And hopefully the guy can sell this house and we can close this chapter, Chair.
Okay. That's proposed by the ward member, but I've got, councillor Lane.
Chairman, I would second that the proposal because I think it's a good return for the district council on what they sold previously. Just for clarity, Chairman, at the page 37, at 4.5, we talk about overage. I think it should read instead of 20, which the officer just now should say 2034. Actually, should say 2044 because it was originally taken in 2014.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. Apologies for the,
Very impressed by
And
it.
I do sometimes beat them.
That's a gold star for you today, councillor Lane.
That'll be a free.
So we've got a proposer in a second there, councillor David wants to come in.
Yeah, councillor Biederman, thank you, leader. I don't know, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for the council. I just wonder whether, I know Malcolm said can't be ring fenced, but I just feel that as it's sort of a housing issue, later on in our agenda, we're talking about hopefully buying more homes for councils. This sort of money should be put towards the hopefully enabling family from Bradford Fleming or North Devon to, you know, if we could buy a house, someone, you know, use it for a future housing purchase of some sort. But, you know, given our housing crisis, but it's just an observation, really. I'm not sure we want a knee-jerk reaction this morning, but I just think that's the sort of thing that should be using this money for. Thank you.
Mr. Trick.
Chair, the, obviously capital receipts when they come into the authority, there's two separate processes. Obviously, there's the sale of assets, which creates the capital receipt, which obviously is this in terms of the capital receipt that will come from the vehicle access. The approval then of the capital programme is obviously a separate process. Therefore, we need to see a separate report come forwards in relation to where capital spend would likely to be recommended for. The capital receipt itself will go into our capital receipts reserve. That will sit there and obviously fund the wider capital programme. But obviously, if a separate report comes forward in the future for consideration, whether it be a housing matter or something else in terms of capital priorities, consideration of how that's funded and where the capital receipt gets allocated can be made at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a recommendation by councillor Prowse, seconded by councillor Lane. All those in favour of recommendations 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 set out in your report? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Triggs. And obviously pass on our thanks to Mrs. Bond.
I've already got a secretary.
So now we've got consultation item 8 on regulating short-term lets, pages 43 to 72. I've got a gentleman called Rick Wilde who will introduce himself, but for enable this to happen at this meeting, I have to propose that we suspend standing orders. Could I have a seconder to suspend? Councillor Biederman, thank you. All those in favour that we suspend suspend standing orders? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Rick Wilde, would you like to stand up and introduce yourself?
Yeah, look, do you want to sit here?
Can you come down to the table here?
Mike Murray's just having a back.
Sorry. So, to give it some context, Rick, if you could just start off by, obviously, you've seen the council's response in the agenda.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, you would like councillors to take in some other information on before we actually put in the proposal, because the deadline is on Wednesday.
Wednesday, yes, time is tight.
So we'd like to give you this opportunity to speak so members can be a little bit more informed and give a balanced view.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And just explain who you are and what you do.
I will do. Thank you. And first, I'd like to thank the chair for inviting me at short notice, because it was very short notice. So thank you for that, and thank you to the members for allowing me this opportunity to speak for you. It is very much appreciated. So, as the chair has said, my name's Rick Wilde. I was the former Chief Growth Officer at the Travel Chapter, which hopefully many of you are aware of, but it is one of the leading websites that operate self-catering accommodation in the UK. Their flagship website is holidaycottages.co.uk. It's headquartered in Bideford, and it is a well-respected business. It's been running for over 35 years, family run for a long period of time. I'm not here to ask the council to change their responses. I've read them, albeit very, very quickly, because my wife and I were at a triathlon yesterday, so I haven't had a huge amount of time to digest them all. But I'm not here to ask the council to change their responses at all. I think it's very important that in a consultation scheme, everybody puts their view forward based on the evidence that they've been presented with. And based on their views, and obviously that's the whole point of the consultation scheme. Industry will have their view, trade bodies will have their view, local authorities and the like will also have their view. But what I was hoping was just to spend a little bit of time to provide a bit of voice from the industry and hopefully sort of ask or look to make a recommendation that within all of this, people that have an interest, so local authorities, people within the industry, trade organisations, all actually work together collaboratively, because there are issues out there. Like I've lived in North, I love living down here. I've lived here since 2015 and absolutely love it down here. And there are issues, and we acknowledge that there are. But equally, the local tourism industry is of huge benefit to the local economy, to a lot of other businesses that rely upon it, the planning measures in themselves, I'll come on to in a bit more detail in a minute, but the planning measures in themselves are very complex and are quite a blunt tool to something that we as a business do not think is a bigger concern and has potentially been sort of put forward. But equally, everybody's entitled to their view, and it's a case of if the planning measures are going to be introduced, they are very complex. Kind of I was talking about just how complicated they are and some of the unintended consequences that could be on either side. And so it would be very much, if they are to be introduced, could all parties, local, national, government, trade associations and key members in the industry work together to make sure that they're implemented in a way that actually targets the harms that are being experienced, but equally don't cause unintended consequences that could damage the local economy. So that's sort of broadly why I'm here. I'm not here to try and change anybody's mind, because that's not who I am. And equally, I'd just like to say that I left the business in December 2020. So my role, as my title would suggest, was to try and grow the travel sector. And I had three principal roles within that. So the self-catering accommodation agency market was very fragmented. At the time that I joined, we had 2,300 properties on the website, and they currently have 15,000 now. Now, that is not to say that there have been such a drastic amount of new properties that have come onto the market. But at the time that I joined, the Travel Chapter was still the fourth largest agency in the UK. But there were many, many other small little holiday cottage agencies that were dotted around the whole of the UK. One example, I remember buying a business from a lovely lady called Jane in Polruan. And she had 70-ish properties in Polruan, just on polruancottages.com. So you'd only find her cottages if you were searching for a cottage in polruan.com. And it wouldn't be on Airbnb, because Airbnb hadn't really grown into the UK sector at that point. So that sort of fragmented sector led to quite a large consolidation. It also led to, with the introduction of Airbnb, a lot of existing properties then being put on Airbnb as another growth platform. So part of my role was to lead that sort of acquisition strategy, and that required me to really, really understand a sector that not a lot of people do, because, as is acknowledged by a lot of the parliamentary briefing reports, and I think as is probably acknowledged within the council, and I remember speaking to John when COVID hit, there isn't an awful lot of accurate data out there, largely because all of the properties have been on very small agencies for a very long period of time. it's been an industry that's been self-regulated because you've had a lot of agents that are there that are very hands-on in terms of making sure that their owners do the right thing. So the data that is out there is often quite tricky to properly sort of understand, and it focuses quite heavily on Airbnb, which reflects the growth of the platform as opposed to the actual growth in the number of properties. And I was delighted actually that looking at some of the responses that that Karen put together, and also reading some of the letters that have been put forward to government, that you've actually focused on VOA, because the VOA data, whilst it does not represent every single short-term let in England and Wales, because there are various criteria that have to be met, it is a much more credible sort of data source to show the growth. But equally, there are still some quirks within that, because in COVID times, a lot of people realised they should have registered for business rates, because they should have then, because they wanted the COVID grants, and they haven't because they just weren't aware of it. And so there was a spike, and I noticed in one of the letters that were talking about the 21% spike in a 2-year period. Quite a lot of that, and we can see that from our internal data, was actually a lot of owners who were operating holiday lets, but then registered on VOA, like, because they didn't get the COVID grants. And so the data is really tricky to understand. I spent an awful lot of time, like 5 years, really getting my head around it. And so when I saw a lot of the consultation responses or the proposals, I was concerned that some of the data that has been put forward to justify the proposals is flawed, because it didn't sit right within my sort of gut feeling in terms of what the market looked like. Particularly, there is one stat about the rise of short-term lets in Cornwall being 661% in the 5 years to September 2021. I don't believe that is correct, because in the article that it refers to, it ends with a number of 15,000 short-term lets, then being sort of the end figure. If there was a 661% rise, that would have meant that there was only 2,300 short-term lets in Cornwall in 2015. There clearly wasn't, because people just walking around Cornwall would know that there's more than 2,300 properties, but there were equally 9,000 that were registered on the VOA database. Now, this is a stat that has been, like, it is quoted in the government's actual consultation proposal. It has been quoted twice in Westminster Hall debates. It has been relied upon, and I'm not criticising in any of this. I'm not criticising like the government, local authorities, or any of them for relying on these stats, because they are stats that have been presented to them that they have relied upon in good faith. I'm just trying to demonstrate that actually it's a very difficult sector to get your head around, to then make very important policy decisions such as introducing planning measures, because planning measures are complicated. They do have very tricky rules. Like, again, I thought it was an excellent point that Ken made in the responses, that there are a number of properties down here that do actually have holiday let restrictions, where people can't actually operate as a primary residence. And is there a risk that these new rules could actually result in property flipping back from being a holiday let into a full-time residential dwelling? There is another risk, which is something that is similar that's happened to HMOs, where, like, sort of if a property sort of happened to, like, sort of fall from what is proposed to be C5 to C3, it could get trapped there if an Article 4 direction had been made in a particular area. Like, these are only two unintended consequences that I thought of in the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure there are very more. So from the travel chapter's perspective, we wholeheartedly support the registration scheme. We think it's a fantastic thing to introduce. We think it will finally give, like, that clarity of data. It will finally also help people identify the different types of short-term lets, because when people say there are 257,000 short-term lets in the UK, that could consist of some people renting out their rooms. It could consist of some people renting out their own homes just for a temporary period of time. If they go on holiday, they can fund their holiday by renting out their house. If they live in Wimbledon, they can get some money for the Wimbledon weeks. It can consist of entire homes that do have holiday let restrictions on them. And obviously it can consist of entire homes that could be somebody's primary residence. But it is not true to say that those 257,000 homes could all be somebody's primary residence. So the registration scheme would firstly provide a very sort of accurate, very clear picture of the very diverse nature of what the short-term let market looks like, and therefore allow people to make much better, in my opinion, much better informed policy decisions as a result. The second thing that I think is great about the registration scheme is that it will promote greater health and safety. I think a lot of people that, in the traditional agency market, like the travel chapter, we've always promoted and educated owners on the health and safety obligations. It is vital that guests are kept safe. It's vital that guests are also encouraged to holiday responsibly, and that actually that they do respect the local communities, and that is something that is core to the way that we operate in managing the relationship between the owners and customers. And I think the registration scheme will only further enhance that. But the key for me is that the registration scheme will provide everybody with that core data that is currently missing. In relation to the planning measures, so what the government are proposing is that they are looking to introduce two different classes. So at present, the majority of people that have residential planning can operate a holiday home from that house or home. What they're proposing to do is implement two separate classes called C3 and C5. C3 will still be like a residential home. C5 will be a specific definition catered for what they're defining as short-term lets, but I think it's better to call them second homes. Now, they are stating in their consultation proposal that these provisions are designed to manage the increase in short-term lets. They're not designed to potentially close existing businesses, and the way that they will operate is that once the legislation comes in, if you are a holiday let, you'll be C5, if you're a residential home, you'll be C3, and then on top of that, there'll be permitted development rights that will allow people the flexibility to move between the two classes, which is sensible if the proposals are to be brought in. But there are a lot of nuances and a lot of quirks in terms of exactly how those provisions could be defined, and so that they don't track homes or that they capture the homes that they should do, and that they don't track homes that they shouldn't. And Ken and I were also talking about the fact that Article 4 directions themselves have very strict criteria in terms of what the hurdles that you have to go through in order to make an Article 4 direction. And so I think there is whilst we don't think that the planning measures are a proportionate response at this moment in time, because we don't think that the increase in the number of homes that could be primary residences is as significant as potentially being portrayed. If they are to be introduced, we would just ask that there is a much greater, much more focused consultation process, which involves all stakeholders, to find the right balance, because there are a lot of businesses within the local area that are reliant on a vibrant tourism trade. I know it is not North Devon, but I've seen the growth and regeneration of Appledore because I live in Northern. And a number of years ago, I understand that Appledore wasn't really a very attractive place for people to live. People didn't generally buy properties over there. But through a vibrant tourism economy, a lot of derelict pubs like the Royal George have been regenerated. And there have been new businesses like the Fame Factory, lots of local coffee houses, family-run local businesses that have then prospered from the regeneration of a town, largely through a vibrant tourism economy. And so, we can talk about those numbers, how much it means to the local economy. Lots of clever economists and economists have done all of that. But there are real-life examples that everyone can draw upon. The other one that I has found in my mind is that the UK self-catering industry has been resilient throughout good times and bad. So we can easily demonstrate that the booking trends do not change.
I'm sorry, but could you be a little bit more specific and just say which particular areas here that you're concerned about, rather than, I was very interested, but we have a report in front of us, so you can focus on that.
Yeah, sure, sorry. So I think the key parts that we are concerned about is that the planning proposals are being put forward based on potentially flawed data and a lack of understanding of the market, and therefore we think that they're potentially too blunt an instrument to challenge or to sort of to tackle something that isn't properly understood. So that's our key concern. The second is, if the rules are going to be introduced, then planning is a very complex area, and a real sort of deep review and consultation process with the industry is required to make sure that any guidance is introduced in a proportionate way that actually reflects the very diverse nature of the sector. Because what we don't want is guidance to be put out there that then can't actually be enforced because it isn't proportionate, or it's been based on poor data. So those are the core points that we would like to get across, and you know, hopefully we can be an important partner in trying to make sure that if these rules are introduced, they are introduced in a balanced and proportionate way. I think that's what I have to say.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, for your points made. I think it's really good, and I do know that obviously I know people personally, particularly in Broughton, who are classed as C3, possibly with a C3 registration as a residential home, but rely on that income to afford that home by living with other people during the summer months where they can rent the property out and get some income to allow them to afford their mortgage for the rest of the year. Very complicated area, and thank you for putting your points forward.
Thank you very much, Mr.
No problem. You feel free to stay. So resume the meeting. Councillor Beardman, seconded Councillor Bell, that we resume the meeting on agenda item 8. All in favour? Thank you. So, agenda item 8, I'll hand over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Miles.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first point to make is that in considering these consultation responses, the council is in no way saying it's anti short-term holiday lets. And the other point to make is that although the issue for us locally is around holiday lets, this consultation is short-term lets. It's not targeted purely at holiday lets. The members have had a couple of reports in the past about some of the implications for the increase in short-term holiday lets that we've experienced in the area. And as a consequence of those reports, the letter that is attached to your agenda that was written to Michael Gove in December 21 was sent. And also attached to your report is a document that was prepared as a briefing for Devon MPs about the impact of second homes and short-term holiday lets on our local housing markets. We saw it. As Mr. Wilde said, it is really difficult because the data isn't there. The data that you'll see presented in those documents, some of it is done through is achieved through searches on Airbnb or Rightmove, not an exact science by any means. And the actual numbers of holiday lets that we looked at are taken, as was suggested, through the business rate system, because that's the only certain way that we can identify such properties. No doubt there are other properties that are operating outside of the business rate system through the council tax system, but we've got no means of identifying them. So I think probably the least controversial element of consultations or the consultations that are out is the registration scheme. That scheme has been called for by this local authority, by other local authorities as well, because we simply do not have the data, and that registration scheme will provide that data. In principle, I don't think there's any issue with that as far as we're concerned, and the consultation response that we're sending back is one of broadly being in support of it. There are lots of questions, as you'll have seen from the report, about that registration scheme, i.e. should local authorities operate it? Should it be operated by the Tourist Board, Visit England, or other national bodies that might be set up? Our view is it should be operated by the local authorities. We operate registration schemes right across the board. You know, I can't compare it. Scrap dealers, a whole load of different things that we license and register. So we're very used to operating registration schemes, and we can do that. And if the registration scheme is introduced at the same time as the planning system changes, then local authorities having first-hand knowledge of that data is going to be really important, because otherwise how can we assess whether to issue an Article 4 direction or whatever it might be under the planning system? So us having that data, I think, is really important. There's questions in there about what type of unit should be registered under that registration scheme, and you'll see the responses. The purpose set out by government in introducing the registration scheme is really twofold. One is to gather the information, but also to ensure that operators of short-term lets are doing so properly with the right controls in place, the right certifications, etc. So it's about public safety as well. And again, like I said, that's, you know, that fits fairly squarely in our remit, really. There are questions around which types of properties should be included, and it makes it clear that hotels won't be included. Temporary accommodation could be thought of as short-term holiday lets. The type of accommodation that we operate won't be included. So it is purely around those types of properties that would be let for recreational purposes, genuinely. There are also questions around the length of time that the registration should cover, with suggestions that being either from 1 year or up to 5 years, I think it is. What we've suggested is it should be somewhere between 1 and 3 years, which is the norm for registration schemes that we operate. But we're also saying within there that there should be an obligation on the owners to notify us of any changes during that period. So if it's a registration scheme for 3 years, then we should be notified of any changes if that occur in the meantime. There's also a question around whether the registration should be submitted by, or whether the registration should attach to a unit of occupation, or whether it should be an operator. So an operator running, I don't know, 200, 100 properties, whatever it might be, whether they should register individually or whether it should be individual properties. And our suggestion is that it should be individual properties, because if you go back to the purpose of this, it's about gathering information and making sure properties are to the correct standard. And it's very difficult to do that if you've got a registration of a substantial number of properties. It also asks about the type of information to be provided as part of that registration. Should we be receiving the gas safety certificates and all the rest of it? And we've suggested we should. And it also talks about enforcement of the registration scheme, and whether there should be offences created, if you like, for failure to register, failure to notify us of changes, etc. And we feel there should be. The other element to enforcement, which is also covered by the consultation, is whether the large operators, the Airbnbs, etc., should ensure that the registration number is included on any advertisement. And we've said they should be, because that then starts the enforcement process, if you like, without the formal process that we would need to get involved in. It also talks about the fee, and what we've said there is that the fee for registration should really be on a cost recovery basis. You know, we're not looking to make a profit out of it, and that's exactly the same as a lot of the registration schemes that we already operate. We have a system set up where we record the costs of operating that scheme, and the fee should cover it. And it also talks about who that fee should be payable by, whether it should be the big operators, Airbnb, etc. Our view is it should be the actual owner of the property, because as has just been said, there's lots of smaller operators out there, there's individual operators. If you go back to the purpose of the scheme, it is to ensure that we're getting that information, and therefore the fee should probably be payable by the owner. I can go through more of those questions if you like, Chair, but that's pretty much the summary of the registration scheme. As I said, I don't think it's that controversial, but you'll see the questions that have been raised and the suggested answers that we've put forward. In relation to the planning changes, which is the more controversial element, all I would say at the start of this is that as a local authority, we have called for changes in the planning system to provide more control. And the reason we've done that is, as was suggested just now, that we have seen a substantial increase in the number of short-term holiday lets in the area. We've jotted down figures somewhere just now, but we've gone from 1,646, I think, in July 21 up to 1,900, or just short of 1,900 in April 23. So in just short of 2 years, quite a substantial increase. Now, some of that may well be down to existing operators changing over to the business rate system, we don't know. And that comes back to the lack of information, but it's quite a substantial increase. And at the same time, we also saw a substantial increase, a substantial decrease in the private rental sector. And again, it's anecdotal, it's just from searches of Rightmove, etc. But figures from other agencies suggested in this area 67% reduction in the number of private rental properties that were available for people to rent. And also anecdotally, we know from conversations that we've had with local estate agents that in that sort of really hot period, not hot in terms of weather, but in that hot period for short-term holiday rentals, about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, a lot of properties were shifting from private rental into the holiday market. So as a consequence of that, as I said, the letter and the briefing paper that we put together for the MPs did ask for changes to the planning system to be able to exert some control. The controls that are now being suggested, as you heard just now, there will be the introduction of a new use class for short-term letting, C5. But at the same time, there'll be a permitted development right that's introduced so that if you are setting up a new short-term let, in most areas, you will do so without the need to apply for planning permission. Because although it's a new use class, you can set up a separate use class, permitted development rights will allow you to change over to a holiday let or short-term let and vice versa as well. What the suggested changes are doing is introducing the possibility that on top of that, local authorities that feel that they have particular issues in their area can introduce an Article 4 direction, which effectively removes the permitted development rights. So that would mean that anybody that wishes to move to from C3, permanent residential, into the short-term holiday market C5, would need to apply to the local authority for planning consent. But that's not an automatic consequence of these changes. The local authority would have to go through a process of introducing the Article 4 direction, and that would be a committee decision. And the only way you could do that, as Mr. Wells suggested, is fairly restricted. The only way you can do that is if you can show that there's damage in the area, if you like, or that it's of substantial benefit to the area to actually do it. And even then, it's questionable as to whether you would be able to introduce that across the whole district, or whether you could just pick, I don't know, Georgian or Ilfracombe or somewhere like that. And that's something that we would need to see when the guidance comes out. So in terms of the questions, as I said, for the short-term, for the use classes changes, you've got the questions which I've referred you to, and the committee response or committee report outlines the suggested replies. The highlights, if you like, we have referred to the fact that in the call for evidence, we suggested control through the planning process or through some sort of licensing regime. There was a question there about, do you agree with the introduction of a new use class for short-term holiday lets? And we've said, yes, we agree, because of that sort of background situation in terms of the increase in numbers, etc., that I've just referred to. One point to note, which is highlighted in question 4, is that the use class changes are not intended to operate retrospectively. So those properties that have already moved over to short-term lets will not need to apply for planning consent should these changes come in. So they will be exempt from it. The point that we were making there in our response is that may well mean that we end up with a whole load of applications for what's called certificates of lawful use. Because if you've got a whole load of properties that have been used as short-term lets for 4 years or 10 years, whatever the relevant period is, they will probably be wanting to establish that use and say that it's lawful. Otherwise, they might get caught if they subsequently change. So we might end up with a whole load of extra work as a result of that. The other points to bear in or to note, question 12, I think it is, talks about whether there should be an exemption to allow people to let their properties for either 30 nights or 60 nights or 90 nights, it's been suggested in any calendar year. before these provisions kick in. And this is based on what happens in London, where you've got a separate scheme completely to this, where they are allowed to change the use for a set number of nights per year. We've said there that we consider those three options too long. If you look at other permitted development rights, most of them talk about 14 days, or some of them talk about 28 days. If what's being proposed here is to try and allow for people to let their properties, as Mr. Rogers talked about, for sporting events or something like that, then we were suggesting a period of 14 nights, 2 weeks would be. But that's for members to take a view on the thing. The other option is to not have that exemption at all, and then it's for local authorities to decide whether a particular change, for a couple of days while somebody's away or something like that, is de minimis, and just wouldn't be enforced against. But I accept that that's a bit of an uncertain situation, really. I think that was it really to highlight. There is question 16, which says, do you have any further comments you wish to make on the proposed plan changes? In the proposed questions, I've written no, but it's for members to say, whether you prefer me to put something in there around raising concerns about the general approach with Article 4 directions. Because as I said, they're not easy to come by. You do have to go through some hoops before you can put an Article 4 direction in place. And so, members, I'm not trying to put words in members' minds, but members may take the view, well, actually, are we actually going to do an Article 4 direction? Will we put one in place? Will there actually be any controls through the planning process in our hotspots that we've got in our area? And so there could be that could be the opportunity to raise some general concerns about that approach. But that's about it, Chair. I think happy to answer any questions, or if members have got any particular concerns about particular answers that have been suggested, more than happy to go through it in more detail.
Very, very current and controversial subject this is at the moment. It's a thing that all residents in North Devon are talking about, and we know about the housing situation. So I'm just going to open it up to the floor. Councillor Knight, then Councillor Maskell, Councillor Crabb, Councillor Bell. I'll bring you all in, don't I?
Yeah, we'll put us in.
Councillor Knight. Clayton, sorry.
Councillor David Clayton. Thanks for the report. It starts with a letter to Michael Gove, which I thought was a really good letter, actually, considering what you said, Chair, about the situation in North Devon. Did we get a response from Michael Gove? And I was surprised to see it's not in there. Was there a response?
Not that I recall.
Well, I think we should highlight that. We should write to the Tory MP around here to say this is appalling, that there's been no response. Why has there been no response? And how did she, do anything in regard to that? Because it's such an important issue. If you're dealing with it, I think it's very easy in the government to pass these things on back to local council. You say about the registration scheme, which I think I'm 100% in favour of. It should have been done years and years ago. To solve the issues that you were talking about and the figures. But it comes with a resource issue, surely. You said we can afford to do it. We've got the people to do this. Have we? You mentioned about the enforcement aspect to it. How many enforcement officers do we have in this policy? And are they being utilised? And if you're going to use enforcement officers for dealing with this, for things like gas certificates and ensuring full checks, doesn't that take them away from what we've already got? So I would suggest that we haven't got the resources. And a special case, if you look on page 52, I think it is, it talks about how North Devon should be considered as a special case, given the figures that are presented on page 52, and the numbers of properties that are used for short lets. So I would suggest that we write to the government again and say, it is going to be funded by you. Why should we be funding this? You mentioned about it would come out of the registration would come out of the actual fee. Has that been worked out? Because is the fee going to cover the enforcement as well? And if not, where is the extra money going to come from? So Is the government, with this consultation, actually suggesting that they would be giving extra money to local authorities? And if not, why not? As I said, they're very adept at putting things onto other bodies, and they should be taking responsibility themselves. Sorry for going on for long, but the market will be responsible.
Okay. Just in relation to the first point, responses and, you know, whether the local MP is aware of it. What I say is, I put on the report, the original letter to Michael Gove, and the report that went to the Devon MPs. There's been quite a bit of correspondence about this subject to and fro between us, government, between us and, well, Housing Crisis Group as well have been involved, and also with government officials. So this is just a flavour of the issues, really. Wasn't intended to be a sort of complete picture of the only correspondence that we've had with dealers for the matter. And I know from my discussions with the local MP, she's well aware of these issues, and has been raising them in government as well. It's not for me to stand here supporting the MP, but I'm just telling you factually that she has been aware of those issues and she's been involved in them. In relation to resources, the point being made, the point that I was making about the fee is that it should cover the costs. So if you look at our resources now, I would probably agree with you that no, we don't have the resources to be able to check this. But if we have a registration scheme that properly covers the costs, then we can deal with that. So we can increase the resources that we've got to cover it. And you're absolutely right that that registration fee should cover issues such as enforcement, because that's exactly what it does with other registration schemes that we've got in place and licensing schemes that we've got in place. So I'm quite happy to change that question, if you like, to make it clear that it should cover all of the costs associated with the registration scheme, including enforcement, just to make that absolutely clear.
Right. Thanks. Just a supplementary, Chair, just very quickly. Are you saying that the fee would cover the registration? Yeah, I get that. But then the fee would also cover taking on another enforcement officer to deal specifically with this or not?
Well, I mean,
how many enforcement officers do we have?
In our license, we have a separate licensing team which would probably deal with this registration. And we have.
So we have had two licensing officers that are undertaking enforcement duties, but we have other officers within separate different service strands for environmental protection, food safety, health and safety, who also complement our enforcement work in relation to licensed premises and registered premises.
So I don't think it's
a quantity.
I don't think you could say at this stage that it would involve an extra member of staff, and therefore, you know, the costs have to be increased by, or our costs would increase by 40k or whatever it might be. But we can make the point quite strongly to government that the registration fee should cover the whole process, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same as the other licensing scheme.
I'll just quickly take a vote on that. I think that we should, as a result of any of this consultation, make the point that any additional cost to this local authority is probably make sure that it comes from funding from any licensing fees, and that should be part of this legislation. I'll take a quick vote on that, because I think that's important, because we strap for cash anyway, every local authority is. All those in favour, have we got a seconder for that? Yeah, all those in favour?
Yeah.
Any against? Any abstention? So all in favour and Councillor Lane abstaining. So, Councillor Maskell.
Councillor Maskell, thank you. Thank you for both reports. I live in Croyd, which has, I think, the parish council census did, I think there's something like over 60% of the housing is holiday homes, with some second homes, but mostly holiday homes. I have to declare, I do holiday let part of my house as a supplementary income, but I would wholeheartedly support registration, and I'm planning, I think I can't open a shop in my front room without getting change of use planning, and I do think that if you buy a home with, intention of changing it into a business, which is what happens the majority of the time. There are local people that holiday let their properties, but anything new that comes on the market now is bought and immediately it's going on as a holiday let, and then the new property also being built straight away being holiday let. And I would also like to see, I notice the parish council now, when they're looking at planning applications, are asking that the new builds are primary residence. And I think that also ought to be something that we definitely should support. We need tourism, but we have a big industry already, and I would like to see the future being more regulated.
Councillor Beaver.
Oh, I was part of the list, Chair. Thank you very much. And yeah, really interesting. I think, first of all, congratulations to officers on pulling all this together, because like I said, it's not easy, but really helpful and informative to understand the situation. And you know, obviously, as a member of the public statement, there's a balance to be had. And I think, as Councillor Maskell just pointed out, I think certain parts of our communities, the balance is clearly not right, and we need legislation to help control it and make sure that we've got that right balance. Because ultimately, there's no point in having a tourism offer if there's nobody there to service it. So again, how often do you see it? We're closed on a Monday and a Tuesday, no staff, etc., etc. There's nothing more for the long-term sustainability of our tourism offer. There's nothing more frustrating to tip up on holiday, treat the kids off out for the day, go to get something to eat. Oh, they're closed on a Monday. You know, when you consider that, you know, when you go to, they probably come from cities. I'm always amazed when I go to cities out to 24/7 life, and then suddenly you come on holiday to North Devon and at 3:30, the cafe's packing up and putting the chairs inside and getting a cup of tea. So I think there's definitely a balance to be had, and I really support the registration to planning side of it. Do I really understand it? No, but I think, you know, again, we do need some control, you know, definitely need some control. Certainly what frustrates my community massively is we see all these houses and you buy into it a bit if you know that local people will get the opportunity to get on the housing ladder, but when it suddenly then is on Airbnb or some other site for rent, there's nothing more frustrating. So I really support that. The bit that I think is missing is what we're missing out on. You know, with funding, we talk about registration fees, but funding is a massive thing, and it worries me how many people are having their bins emptied every week and not actually paying their council tax because they're a business. And like I say, we've got no real knowledge of we. So registration will help that, presumably, that if everybody registered, we know we should be collecting from, we should get a fire engine, we should get a rubbish, we should, whatever else it is, you know, police, a lot. You know, we're all paying an awful lot more council tax to receive less services, obviously through government cuts and government funded opportunities. But I think that would also be helping our communities if we made sure that we're actually getting payment from everybody that's receiving the services. And I'm not fighting that, but I just wonder if that's something that ought to be in there, given that we're always saying to the government, please give us more money. Well, actually give us some of this that will enable us to actually recoup some of our losses. But thank you, Chair. That's just some of my observations, but I'm fully supportive of everything that we're doing.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Graham Bell, I was a founding member of the North Devon and Torridge Housing Crisis, but I have left that group because I thought there would be a bit of a conflict of interest there if I was. Largely, I support everything the council's saying, and I'm interested in everything Mr. Wild said as well. The Housing Crisis Group is very keen to say that there should be a register and not a register, that's a licensing scheme. We think that should be clear. A register is more something that anyone can join, but a licensing scheme is something that people can be excluded from. And we know that there are areas where that is problematic. I think very much what Mr. Wild said, that the numbers have jumped up massively, but that's because people have recorded these numbers in different ways. But we know that whatever the numbers were a few years ago, they were much too high. And something the Housing Crisis Group has been keen to say is that actually the holiday lets, the short-term lets used as holiday lets, do have a relatively minor impact on holidays, on the tourism industry, because the tourism industry has for more than a century been well catered for by, coming up by hotels. We have a number of holiday parks in the area. These are being impacted by these short-term lets and that they are losing numbers, but actually the tourism numbers are staying roughly the same. The short-term lets do work well in areas like Appledore and Braunton, where we actually have very little tourism accommodation aside from the short-term lets. And that's an area where they would be done better to be enhanced. So by giving a level of control, consulting with local industries as well as with neighbourhoods and with town and parish councils, you would be able to get a local area of control, which would bring down the number of lets in somewhere like Croydon, which is badly impacted, but also has a tourism industry, but enable someone like Appledore, which doesn't have the number of hotels or holiday accommodation, and Braunton, which again doesn't have really anything in the way of hotels, to sustain what they've got. With regards to the planning, that was my question, if you don't mind. With the change between C3 and C5 and the use of Article 4, what I think a lot of people would like to see is that, and whether it could be targeted on new builds, going in, as Councillor Maskell said, Braunton Parish Council does ask for residency for new builds, but when you've got large scale developments, that we would like to see as fixed as C3, because we know that the comments we get in the housing crisis group, or they get in the housing crisis group, really do say these are great big houses going up, none of them move to local use because they'll be snapped up for holiday lets. That's my question really. Will we be able to apply this? Will be able to apply the C3 use as for in large developments?
Okay. I can only give you my understanding of the proposals. And if they do go through, then they'll obviously be fleshed out with further guidance on the law. But it also gives an opportunity perhaps to explain the planning changes a bit more simply if it's not coming across that way. But at the moment, you've got dwelling houses in C3, so that's all dwelling houses, whether they're let the short-term holiday lets, etc. And as Councillor Maskell said, if you want to change your house into a shop, that's a different use class, A1 I think it is, and so you would need planning consent to do that, unless planning consent is granted by government through permitted development rights. And there are various changes of use that are covered by permitted development rights. So you can change offices into residential, etc. That's covered by permitted development rights. So you would need to apply for planning permission. And what the government could do as part of these proposals is say, okay, we're just setting up a new use class C5 for short-term holiday lets and leave it like that. If they left it like that, that would mean that anybody wanting to change from C3 to C5 would have to apply for planning consent to the local authority. But what they've said is, yes, it's a change of use, but we will grant you, government will grant you plan permission through permitted development rights. So that's what they're proposing. And what they've said is that if a local authority wants to change that, then you introduce an Article 4 direction and you remove those permitted development rights. It goes back to the original state of having to apply for planning consent. So that's why I was saying, if members, that question that said, are there any other comments around those changes? If members are concerned about that, then that's the time to express it. But going back to your question, Councillor, about my feeling is, without seeing any further guidance, that if you've got a new housing estate being developed, that would fall within use class C3, because you develop it, unless you've got a specific holiday development coming forward, but if that's a permanent residential scheme coming forward, and if these changes go through and there is no Article 4 direction issued by the council, then there would be nothing to stop somebody buying that property and using it as C5, because permission to do so is being granted by government under these proposals.
Well, so I've got Councillor Prowse, Crabb and Lane.
Chair, I think, for me, this report talks about reduction in units that are being let, sort of private letting. And I think it's important to stress there are two big issues that are pushing the number down. And one of them is the change in government tax legislation that is forcing a lot of landlords to think again about getting out of the sector. They don't get the tax relief they used to get on their debts. And coupled with that, a lot of these buy-to-let mortgages have doubled because, they tend to be on shorter terms. Buy-to-let mortgages tend to be on 2 4-year terms rather than longer ones. So their costs have doubled in terms of their mortgages. And the third thing, of course, is interest rates have risen. So that people can actually flog it and get 5%, 6% now probably, by just investing the money. And that's something that we haven't got any control of, but I think it is a huge factor. And if you look on Rightmove, it looks as though there's a bigger shift, I think, from private renting into Airbnbs and holiday lets. But in reality, there's probably not that number that we think. And of course, what's happened is that this year, the holiday let stuff, it may be different in Croydon and Woolwich, where they're really close to the beach. A lot of them are struggling to fill their weeks. So I think that the reason I asked you if Rick could come today, it's not because I disagree with these changes, but I think we need to get the message across that we're not anti the holiday business per se. I think that is really important. And as a lead member for the economy, I just think I wanted to say that. For me, I mean, anything in planning, if you're going to refuse it or approve it or go, you need an evidence base. And that's where the registration process will be really important. Because I hear Ken saying he's worried about an Article 4, but the great thing about an Article 4, like a neighbourhood plan, is that it can actually pick on particular hotspots. And we know where the parishes are. I mean, in my patch, it's not a great problem. You get near to Exmoor, some bits, say Chalicum, of course that's in National Park, but there are a lot of holiday units, second homes and things, on Exmoor. But it does seem to me that we've got a new local plan we're about to, and we ought to be talking to the government about being able to introduce these sorts of flexibilities within our local plan. In the same way neighbourhood plans can say, we're going to allow a new house, it can only be occupied as a primary residence. So I think, we all criticise the planning process. We're right on the cusp of doing this work on the local plan. So we've got the chance to feed that into the local plan process and ask the government to support us where we think there is a problem or we need to have particular targeted policies, Chair. I hear what Ken's about. I don't know what other tool there can be for an Article 4. Otherwise, we're going to have a blanket ban across everywhere. And I think that would be, and it would actually rip communities apart where you've got an odd one that's let, where the neighbours would, the whole thing becomes, I say it's got to be evidence-based. And I think an Article 4 direction following a registration scheme would be the way to deal with it for me, because that's the logical way, because you then have the evidence base that you can say, yeah, we're going to defend this Article 4. And I think the communities would back that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Councillor Crabb.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Crabb, I think I should have said that earlier. Just really to say that I don't know if we've got any data. I mean, certainly what I'm getting on the ground in Ilfracombe is that we've had peak Airbnb. I think that's been and gone. Malcolm's listed out there's a lot of stuff I've got in here actually about why people are getting out of the rental market. I mean, I just got this area that, there's this massive piece of legislation important to that, like the horse had wandered off somewhere, I think, to be fair, but there we go. So I won't repeat Malcolm's, but what I will pick up on is I would have said that 30 days is unreasonable. I mean, I would have said that a lot of people move into a caravan and one another. I mean, as a youth, I used to have to live in the attic in the summer. So mother could earn a few shillings to put shoes on my feet. There we are. I still got this. So that's it. But I mean, if the argument for it, if you present a proposal, I'll take it.
We'll take that on board. Councillor Lane.
I like to be fair interest with the landlord support. I think there should be more consultation businesses, more than what probably have been. In regulation, more than what regulation, but I agree with the gentleman said about regulation. To me, and I made a few notes here because I'm not in this planning committees and all why. So basically, to me, we're dealing with something here which is subjective. I mean, you put in something which is go back to consultation, and at the end of the day, the government's going to decide which way they want to go with it. So basically, it's something which is subjective. The reality is, there's not enough homes, properties for sale, rental, or affordable in North anyhow. And also, the reality is that it's all about the marketplace. All of the properties, because I think you need to look at the complete package of it, really. All the properties create income, which then feed into the economy of the country. It's simple as that. I mean, I know because I pay tax at 20% on rented properties. The government's getting that. How they redistribute that, I think, is another question. If you've got Airbnb, it's, let me put my glasses on. Basically, rented Airbnb is a balance against rented properties at market value and holiday properties at Airbnb, which help create money for the local economy and create work locally. At the end of the day, everybody's complaining about Airbnb and rent and all this, but the fact is, we're all gaining down here from Airbnb. It actually helps the economy in North Devon, and that's what we need out down here. So it's all about homes. Create work locally, which assists our tourism area and the local area. It appears we are trying to restrict the marketplace and regulate, restrict businesses, and that's not the way the government would go anyway, because they don't want to restrict anything. It appears there could be a reduction in homes from rented with the possibility of more regulation and more restriction on rented properties owners, rented properties owners. The ability to remove the tenants becoming sitting tenants, because the fact is they're trying to also lock it all in here, tie it all up so that tenants become, in effect, you can't get them out, so they're sitting tenants. So the reality is, do landlords decide to keep their properties or decide to sell them? And that's why you can get in the shift now away from people in rented accommodation being homeless, because the landlord is actually selling them up. And the reality is, if you're talking about properties now, nobody's going to buy a property at present with an interest rate of 5%. It's 200,000 because it's going to get you it's going to cost you £10,000 a year in interest alone. You can't recover that back off of the renting properties rate. So that market is going to disappear. So I think you need to look at the broader picture. So I here sitting here agreeing to what consultation is, but you also need to look at the broader picture as well. And I think personally, if the government is, they'll go whichever way they want to, that they can do nothing. So basically, I can't see people invested in properties at the present. What I think they should be doing, the government should be ring fencing some of the income they actually get from all these properties they're getting tax off of, which is at 20%, in ring fence it towards the local economy, and also ring fence it towards housing in North Devon. And providing the photo walls and the planning system and the living rooms is another question and another debate. I think we've got an issue with North Devon, and actually we've got an issue with the country of homes. But you know, you can respond where you like, but I think personally, I really think you need to look at the broader picture as well.
Okay, thank you. Any more want to speak on this?
Respond to a couple of points. I think the first point to make is, as I said at the outset, we are not anti holiday lets at this authority. We appreciate the impact, the positive impact that they have on our local economy. They are part and parcel of our landscape, if you like, and have been for any number of years. And so I don't think the council is looking, and this consultation is looking to stop that. What we're saying, what we have said in the past as a council is, it appears that the balance is slightly shifted in places, is in the wrong, you know, the balance has gone wrong in some areas. Councillor Masker referred to Georgian, I think it's 61.2% or something like that. Roughly. Properties that are no longer being used as permanent residential properties. And that has knock-on impacts on the local community. So schools suddenly start finding it more difficult to fill places. Shops find it difficult to survive in the winter. Some of those services start to disappear. And that's all we're saying. There is, you know, there's an imbalance in certain areas in our authority area, definitely. We are not saying we're anti-holiday lets. It's just trying to find that right balance, I think. I think Councillor Price is absolutely right. I certainly didn't mean to imply that, you know, the reduction in the private sector or private rental sector is purely as a result of shifting over to holiday lets. We know anecdotally that in that period, sort of 18 months, 2 years ago, that was happening a lot. And I spoke to estate agents personally, and they were telling me that that was happening. But there are a load of other factors coming into play in relation to the private sector rental market, and you highlighted some of those. You know, there's also the environmental issues that are being imposed on landlords, which has forced some out of the market as well. So we know that the holiday lets issue isn't the only issue that is in play in that market. It's quite complicated. Just in relation to what Councillor Crabb said about, you know, has the peak finished? It may well have done, I don't know. I mean, Mr. Wilder is a far bigger expert than I am on the holiday market. All I can say is that in the last 12 months or so, we've had another 100 properties registered on as business rates for holiday lets. So we're not seeing that peak through registrations on the business rate system yet. That's still happening, but whether there are other factors behind why they're registering for business rates, and you know, they're just shifting from council tax to business rates, I don't know. So we're not picking that up through our figures anyway. Right. Oh, and just in relation to the Article 4 direction issue, the consultation response that has been completed doesn't suggest departing from that Article 4 direction route. So, you know, there's no need to make any amendments to the consultation response, just in case members felt that's too complicated, and let's just go with the blanket. It requires planning permission to change, and that's it. But the consultation response hasn't been drafted in that way.
Councillor Mansfield.
Right, I just wanted to say that I feel that this report is not attacking our existing holiday industry. It's looking to protect the future of our economy and our residents. And I think, you know, it's not retrospective, is it? So the existing holiday businesses are not going to be massively impacted by this. It's looking to the future, which I think, is that right?
I think the registration scheme would be retrospective.
Yeah, but
not the
that's
planning.
not going to be
No.
a massive issue for most people. They are already, as Rick said, adhering to standards which are set out by the different holiday letting agencies.
Yeah.
They are quite rigorous anyway, so I don't think anyone who's currently doing it is going to have a problem with that. And can we add hot tubs on as well? And permission for hot tubs, I think that would be a really good. It has a massive impact on people's lives, like hot tubs in your neighbour's garden.
Yeah, one of the questions that was asked in the planning consultation was whether properties that are being used for C5 should also have all of their permitted development rights attached to them. And you'll see from the consultation response, I've suggested no, they shouldn't, because holiday let, what we've experienced through the Environment Health team shows that holiday lets are more intensively used, if you like. So if you've got a hot tub in the garden, it's used permanently. It's used it's quite a lot, and we get an awful lot of complaints around noise associated with the outside use or the use of outside spaces in short-term holiday lets. And so we've suggested in the consultation responses that those permitted development rights shouldn't attach to those C5 properties.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry. There is one quick question about the time frame in all this. Consultation ends somewhere around saying this week. Goes to government all over the country. Have they given any indication of how long they will then sit on it? Look at it. I mean, when are we talking about? I couldn't see a date in it.
The changes are proposed as an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill.
Yeah.
So it'll be whatever timescale attached to the Levelling Up Bill. Yeah.
So to summarise, obviously the main things that I've picked up on is any data is a guesstimate. We don't truly know how many units are out there. No one can tell us how many are being used as short-term holiday lets, because it might be just a private thing and a one-man band doing his own letting. And I think that registration point that we've made is crucial to give us some accurate data to start from, because at the moment, it's just guesstimates. And we've only mentioned a few platforms, and there's many more platforms. Airbnb is only one. It gets a masses of publicity. So I think within the consultation, there was one point I'd like to pick up on, Ken, that members have mentioned. I think it was Councillor Proud, who was saying about changing it from 2 weeks to 30 days. Is that the general consensus? Councillor Bell.
Thank you. That's very good. Generally, the 2 weeks seems to be adequate. The problem you have even when you go up to 30 days on some of your houses, some houses that are being used for holiday letting can be making upwards of £1,500 per week. It is the risk you have is that at the moment you're seeing that overwintering is happening for a lot of people are being let houses over winter for long-term let, and of course they're being evicted over the summer, and then for the holiday lets. 2 weeks would restrict the opportunity to do that, because it would no longer be profitable to make people homeless in order to use it. Even for 28 days is still going to generate you a significant £6,000 to £8,000. If you split out, you think other than this abuse, it's a lot more profitable to make somebody homeless, even with that restricted amount. Obviously, it will be less than the 90 days that's used over the summer at the moment, but 2 weeks is adequate to be used for a home to be used for. While somebody's away during a sporting event, just to move. I also lived in a guest house as a child, and my mother, my brother, and my sister, we all moved into the same room for a couple of weeks in the summer.
So you've got the same shoes as well.
Yeah,
You've got the same shoes as well.
yeah, mine are really old shoes, a lot of walking recently, but it is hard. It is hard, and it's. Moving into the modern day, people are being made homeless in order for houses to be switched to holiday lets, and then that house is back on the market for long-term let in the winter. 2 weeks is enough time for somebody to make a little bit of profit to help themselves, but it won't incentivise people to flip the house between long and short term let.
Thank you. So what I'll suggest, Ken, take all those points on board that have been suggested that you're going to feed in. It is only a consultation. Whether the government will listen is another matter. And we do know that the resources are an impact, and we had a special vote on that. So can I have a proposal that can we submit a consultation?
I would certainly propose it, because I think it's really, the debate this morning, or the discussion this morning, shows how important an issue this is for North Devon. And it's been really interesting listening to everyone in what they've had to contribute to it. But we're all really, really concerned about this as an issue. And it is essential, in my opinion, that we do let the government know exactly what we feel on this issue and on many other issues concerning our housing situation in North Devon. I know I've jumped in again ahead of the lead member for housing, but I hadn't spoken in the debate, so I'm sure he would like to second it, bearing in mind the tweaks that we're going to make as a result of the discussion this morning.
You want to make a final comment? That's right, Joe. Thank you. Thank you. It was just something that I've mentioned in the past is the importance it is the Airbnb and other short-term systems were set up as a rent-a-room scheme, which was a very good idea. Of course, you might have a 3-bedroom house and there'd be 2 of you in the house, 1 bedroom, make a little bit of profit out of that, pay your mortgage off, or pay your cost of living. Something's getting more expensive. I know that when Braunton Parish and Ilfracombe Town made their proposals for generating housing prices, something we were very keen on was the idea of a partial property let, where if you are letting just 1 bed in a 3-bed or 2 beds in a 5-bed, then you should register as part of whatever scheme happens, or be licensing, as I prefer, as part of a scheme, so in order to make sure that your number is on Airbnb. But you wouldn't necessarily need a change of class for that, because it's important for many families to stay in the area. It's important to have that little bit of extra income, and I do think that on any consultations you should be splitting that out as a separate issue and just saying that, well, we do support the holiday industry and we do support a limited number of Airbnbs, because even the Housing Crisis Group recognises that people have got to have jobs to go to, and this really helps. But it is those very small rent-a-room schemes, which is always what I'm trying to think of, they should definitely be supported and sustained, because, yeah, that's what Airbnb was designed to do in the first place. And really, they do generate a lot of income. They do still bring tourists into the area, but they do not displace families out of the area.
Councillor Bell, are you seconding? I will, second. So all those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much. Item 9. Afghanistan resettlement schemes, pages 73 to 76. Report by Head of Planning, Housing and Health.
So, my colleague, Sarah Bentley would like to introduce this paper for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mann. Sarah Bentley, welcome.
Thank you.
Sarah, would you just say who you are so some of the news councillors know?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Bentley, I'm the service lead for housing options and homelessness, and I'm currently leading on the refugee resettlement programmes. So the paper I'm bringing in this morning is regarding the Afghan resettlement scheme. The one we're looking at is the Arab, which is the Afghan relocation and assistance policy. Now that policy is for those that have fled Afghanistan who have had a military background, whether that's working for the MOD directly or indirectly, and kind of fled the Afghan coming into England. In June 2022, the Ministry of Defence offered up 12 units of family accommodation in Ironbeach. This was against the 550 houses that the MOD have been asked to put up for accommodation by the Home Office. In a report to full council in July 2022, we had a recommendation to use 6 of these units for the MOD and for Afghanistan. At this time, we are still working on those properties to get them through, and we currently have agreed on 4 2-bed houses and 2 3-bed houses. As recently been announced by the Home Office and the Secretary of State, all bridging hotels now will be closed for Afghanis. That means they've all been issued with 3 months' notice to leave those bridging hotels, and currently there are 57 hotels across the country with people in them. Now, 9,000 Afghanis have already been rehoused or in temporary accommodation from hotels. There's still currently 8,000 outstanding looking for accommodation. Now, that is families with children and single occupancies as well. So this report makes recommendations for accommodating more people from Afghanistan under the MOD first offer of 12 units. All these would be under the Arab, so they would have to have, if they have that MOD connection, and they wouldn't be selected for those properties unless agreed by the MOD and by the Home Office. Because RMB Chibnall is an active site, they have to go through significant checks to be offered those properties. That won't be relying on us to do that, that will be down to the MOD themselves to do that. Now, with this, there is 2 hotels in Exeter and Exmouth, which currently have around 140 people in there. Now, at this time, we don't know if they are under the Arab scheme or under the Citizen scheme, which is the Arab scheme. We do know that there are still a number of people under the Arab scheme that are in accommodation across the country in hotels, and some have been there now for over a year. Now, these people that will be asked to leave do have full recourse to public funding, which means they have the right to approach any local authority as homeless, and we would have a duty to place them into temporary accommodation and find them long-term accommodation. Now, at this time, the Home Office is asking for all local authorities to assist in this situation. For us, the RMB Chibnall units are a more affordable way of providing this accommodation to the Home Office. The accommodation itself is £5,000 per year, and we don't start paying that accommodation until the families are actually involved in that accommodation. Now, the government have freed up a lot of significant funding to help local authorities in carrying out their duties. So in year 1, each local authority will be getting £10,500 per person. Year 2, that goes down to 6,400, and in year 3, that goes down to 4,400. Now, alongside that, there is additional funding for education and there's additional funding for health. So in education, the separate fund is an average of 4,500 per child. There's additional £850 per adult for English lessons. And there's 2,600 for health partners per person in the local authority as well. There's additional funding of up to £9,150 per person that the local authority can ask for, but this is on a case-by-case basis. So that's if there's significant differences or needs of that family that go beyond the initial 10,500 that we can get, and we can apply for that if required. So the recommendation today is to ask that we extend our offer from 6 units to 12 units. Again, what we are avoiding is larger properties. By asking for 2-bed and 3 beds is ensuring that we don't get large families. We do know within the hotels there are extremely large families, up to 12 to 14 people in one family. So by offering the smaller units, we will avoid that. The leases themselves will be initially for 2 years with an option if managing the MOD's needs at that time could extend to 5 years. But that's depending on whether the MOD are changing, whether places are closing. So we won't know that initially until up to the 2-year period. The advantage of doing it through the MOD is one, that we have the advantage of them doing their checks. So they will do all the risk assessments for us. It means we have a knowing of who's coming to our area. It also is more cost effective. We have, within that funding, looked at we will provide support, as we have done in the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which has been very significantly beneficial for us and has proved a great outcome. So we will be asking for that same support going into the Afghan families as well. We at this time, we don't know the size of families, they have currently formed schools or health, but they have been given a heads up that we are looking shortly to receive our first 6 families coming into North Devon. What this doesn't do, it won't stop anybody approaching us as homeless if they wish to come here under the citizen scheme. What it does tell to us though is when the Home Office are looking at local authorities that are engaging with this scheme, it looks like we have, and we've done as best as we can with the 12 units that were originally offered to us. We've heard from the hotels that most people under the citizen scheme that have been asked that you've got to make homeless applications are saying they want to go to cities. That will have a massive impact. Bristol themselves are now saying they've already had 60 applications with a further 60 to 80 due to make applications to them. So at some point, we believe that the Home Office will step in to the cities and advise people they need to approach the other authorities across those areas. So by doing this, it's emptying that we've now put things in place to try to help with the scheme as much as we can. So the recommendation is that we take the further 6 units. We only take 2 beds or 3 beds. I've checked with the MOD and had numerous meetings with them, and the accommodation is available. We have stressed that the accommodation has to be up to good use, so that we'll need an environmental officer to go around and make sure it's up to a decent standard to avoid any additional costs to the local authority as well. That's the recommendation today. Thank you.
So for new members particularly, I'd just like to say during the Homes for Ukraine's your sterling work, this lady committee has done sterling work. What she doesn't know about the situation regarding housing in these particular circumstances is not worth knowing, so much so that she's been the regional chair of a group of other organisations, and she's a valuable asset to this council. And I would just really like to point that out, Sarah. We do really things that I'm involved with in other spheres. Your name always seems to crop up as a guru in this sort of field. And actually, you're a great asset to the council. I'd just like to say that, and any members can contact Sarah anytime, any questions that they may have. For this scheme, I think it's really, really important to point out that this is a scheme via the MOD, and these properties would not be available for local families at all within North Devon. This is a scheme that has been necessary because of the commitment that the Afghans have given to our forces while in conflict. And this is supporting their resettlement during this time. And I think while we've got the opportunity of having an active military base here in North Devon, these properties are available and they are via the MOD. So I think the risk for us as an authority, apart from people presenting as homeless, which they can do to any authority of you've stated throughout the country, I think it's vital that we go ahead with this in respect of supporting people who are in destitute times in their own and children going through having to expect poor facilities in some of these hotels that we've heard about. Councillor Warden.
Thank you. I take it from what you've just said that you're actually proposing the recommendation. If you are, I'm quite happy to second that. And also echo all the comments that you've made, because I know how Sarah has done sterling work. It's been absolutely phenomenal what she and her team has been doing to help with all the settlement of well, not just the Afghans, but also the Ukrainians, the Syrians, and so on. It's been an ongoing program for a long, long time. But you mentioned the fact that the houses would not be available for anyone else. So this is an opportunity that we should be grabbing, in my opinion, because those particular individuals that we're talking about, these Afghan people, have put their lives at risk in what they were doing for our forces while they were in Afghanistan. And we have a moral duty to actually help them now they're in this country. So I'm certainly happy to second the proposal if you're proposing it, or propose it if you're not, because I think this is something that as a council we morally are obliged to do. And this particular scheme, Sarah's gone through all the details and made sure that we're doing the best possible scheme that we can with 2 and 3 bed houses, etc. So I'm fully in support of this. Thank you.
Councillor Maskell and Councillor Bell.
Chair, I just wanted to confer that I, last year, as the county councillor of the area, did approach Chibnall through the Armed Forces Covenant about the possibility of there's a lot of empty housing on there, and it was a flat no. So, you know, that was, at the time, was frustrating, but it's good to see that there could potentially be some use for those properties. And it's good to hear that you've mentioned the state of them, because they are in quite a bad state, and actually a lot of the people that live in Chibnall do come to me and ask, you know, about the state of their housing.
When we took the first report, it was on the understanding that we initially asked for 50%, so 50% to go to general needs and 50% to go to the MOD. As you said, that's a flat no. And the reasons for that is because it's still a live, active site. At some point, they may need to draw those houses back for military use. We've got semi-assurances that's not going to happen within this 2 years, but we don't know what happens after that period of time. So, yes, I agree the frustration was there, but understood the reasons behind that.
So, the Pickering Foundation brought some Afghans last year, I believe, and showed them around the area, and not one of them applied to live here. So I don't think we're going to be inundated with.
Things have changed now because the government directed now on closing the hotels. So initially, those in the hotel would have offers of 2 to 3 properties that they could turn down before they would have been asked to leave. What the government have done now is, once they get one offer, if you refuse that offer suitable accommodation, you'll be asked to leave immediately because the offer was there. But everybody in those hotels now know that in 3 months' time, it's going to be a staggered close. All hotels will close. We've been told categorically they're not going to change that decision, and they wish to stop the use of hotels because of the incidents happening, and because of the cost. It's £6 million a day so far for the Afghani hotels, so they need to stop the costings on that also.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly to echo what Councillor Maskell said, the housing crisis team were very keen to, we spoke to the base commander at Chibnall, and we got a very nice cup of tea, but a very firm no, and we understand their reasons. We realised there could be Just to echo what Councillor Warden said, this is a fantastic document, this is a fantastic opportunity. I think we do have that problem, as we see at the hospital with nursing staff who are brought from other parts of the world to come here. North Devon sadly isn't the most attractive place to live, and it really should be because it's fantastic, but it does have it is very far from places. Is there any way we could, the question, sorry, is there any way we could be actively encouraging people to come here? Because I really think that we should, as Councillor said, you know, people come here, they look around, they might like the look of it, but it's so far from everything. We need to be demonstrating that if you do come here, we do have Southmead, I imagine, will be taking the children. It's a fantastic school. The academy is also fantastic in Broughton. There are a lot of opportunities here which we desperately need filled. You know, people can make a life here if they do come here. I think, you know, we're nicer than Bristol. We should in some way be promoting ourselves to families to come here. And I think, you know, we have 12 houses. A community can easily be brought up. They would be an isolated community within themselves. We would welcome them, but, you know, we understand the difficulties. So that is a community that can be built if we can attract people to come here.
So what we are doing with Pickwell, we recognise the issues because those coming from our family just want to be in cities. They don't care which city, they just want to be in cities. So what we are doing is putting some brochures together where people are to go what's available here, what could be available. We're doing some films. We're interviewing some other community sponsorship residents that have come by that scheme to say the benefits of it, what they've gained from that. You know, we've got one gentleman now from the community sponsorship scheme that's now gone through university, has now started his own business and employing people locally. So it's looking at the opportunities there as well. So yeah, we are doing that. And hopefully we'll be able to then encourage them. What we are doing on R&B Chibnall though is we didn't want to put them all in one spot because then you create that separation. So what we are going to do is put 2 or 3 houses in each kind of block, so then they're integrating. And we are in communications with the MOD support services then as well, so they're already breaking down the barriers when they arrive, but they integrate with residents already there.
So the application to be to the City of Barnstaple is pretty what we need.
Just put city and they'll be fine. We have a big fine mark.
And it's important to know as well that Chibnall is not all service personnel. There is one street there that is all ports and private, being rented. Councillor Knight.
Councillor
Ricky Knight.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, exciting development. Please take all 12, can we have 24? As you know, it's, as you've just said, the Chibnall is just full of empty premises, which is a bit of a heartbreaker when you're knocking on the door and nobody's there. Well, that actually helps, doesn't it? It speeds things up.
They were there, Ricky, trust me.
I saw him. I think what the work you're doing, amen, it's just fantastic and I fully support it. With regard what you said, David, about the moral obligation, there's an equal moral obligation with Syria and the Dutch. And I just wondered to what extent we are still working with Pickwell on that, because that's one seems sunk below the radar with our concentration.
We're still actively engaged with Pickwell over that. We've got a number of community sponsorships that are doing well, and we are still supporting that. There's new groups that are forming all the time. The issue they've had is the same issue a lot of us are having, is finding their accommodation. So that's, you know, it's across the board. It's not just, you know, local people trying to, you know, for community safety groups to find that suitable accommodation has been quite problematic. But there's still that interest and there's still that desire to help. I think it's just at a time where there's lots of schemes happening all at one time that we need to make sure that attention is going on to all of them, but we haven't forgot about the community sponsorship.
Thanks. Thank you. So members, you've had a proposal from myself and seconded by Councillor Warden that we accept the recommendations as set out in 211 and 212. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Item 10, government's implementation of a full dispersal model for asylum seekers, pages 77 to 80, report by Head of Planning, Housing and Health. Now it's Mr. Mann. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So over the last 6 months, your officers have been really involved in overseeing an incident management team that has coordinated local statutory services, voluntary sector support, overseeing to mitigate the community impact of the contingency hotel that was set up in Guffordshoe. That hotel is now being decommissioned, and this reflects government's aspiration to move away from contingency accommodation, essentially hotels and army camps, to a model that they refer to as dispersed accommodation. So for North Devon and for all housing authorities, government has prescribed a number of bed spaces that should be made available within each of our communities. The target for North Devon is 66 bed spaces. We believe it's in the interests of our community, in the interests of the people that will be accommodated in this accommodation, to work proactively with the government's contractor. The government's contractor in the southwest is called Clear Springs Ready Homes, to ensure that that accommodation is in the most appropriate place. It's configured in an appropriate manner. It is to standard. And in that regard, the council has proactively engaged Clear Springs and has offered an asset of accommodation, a 7-bed house of multiple occupation it owns in Bearsbury, as a contribution to meeting the target of 66 bed spaces. So I'd like to slightly revise the recommendation presented in my paper, and to have your support and your approval for us proactively working with Clear Springs in the provision of the 66 bed spaces, but also seek your explicit approval as regards the offer of the 7-bed HMO unit the council owns in Bearsbury, Barnstaple, as a means to expediting the delivery of the programme as quickly as possible. We believe that property is in the right place and it is suitable to meet the needs of the people that would ultimately be accommodated in it. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So I'll open it. Is that Mr. Beardman and Wade? Beardman? Well, no. So I don't go to an auction because you don't vote that.
Well, I'm sorry.
So this is a directive that's set by government for 66 beds on us as a local authority.
All housing authorities have an allocation.
Yeah. Okay. And we've got to. Well, we've been told this is what our allocation is, 66. We've got a property identified by Mr. Mann, who wants explicit authority from this committee to allow the use of that HMO on a certain street within North Devon, and for the use for these refugees. And members, have you got any thoughts on this? I've got Councillor Maskell, Councillor.
7 beds, are they single beds or could it be couples?
Some of the rooms, Chair, are sufficiently large to accommodate 2 people. And that's why we're so positive about putting this properly forward. We think potentially maybe 10 people could be accommodated in this unit of accommodation. What I didn't reference in my opening, Chair, was the opportunity of the grant funding, which is ring-fence grant funding, to recognise our support for this initiative. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. My question was exactly that, was on the funding. I mean, I know there's a certain amount of grant funding, really, but I mean, I assume that there are other funds, you expect a rental income, you expect to work. If somebody give me like an idiot's guide to the, say if we have identified this property with 7 rooms, what, you're gonna get 3.5 grand per room to kick off with, then 2 if it's done quickly or something, or?
Do we get housing benefit?
So if we were to lease the property to Clear Springs, that would be at a market rent. There would be no subsidy of that arrangement. In relation to the grants that are available to us, there is a basic provision of £3,500 per bed space. The government further incentivises the grant scheme by the efficiency of our response back to Clear Springs. So if bed spaces are procured very efficiently, there is an additional £3,000, and that's reduced to 2,000 if we take a little bit longer market lease. Yeah. So in relation to issues around housing benefits, so these people at this time do not have an entitlement to remain in the UK, so they don't qualify for state benefit at this time. So there is an allowance that is made to the individuals for £40 per week. Their accommodation is funded by the government's accommodation provider, Clear Springs. There's no rental payments as such in that situation.
No, but it's a market. So my question is, so a market rent, a market lease plus 6.5 grand.
Ring fenced grant, unring-fenced grant. Yeah.
And to be clear, this is because of the backlog created by the processing of applications. So they're actually deemed to be processed to see whether they've got the right to remain or not.
So this is the accommodation need arises because of people coming into the UK, principally from boats, into the southeast. People are entitled to make application to remain, and there is a backlog of applications. One of the principal drivers for the government of moving away from contingency accommodation to dispersed accommodation is the significant cost of hotel accommodation. So government see a model of dispersed accommodation as a more cost-effective and a more appropriate way of accommodating people during the time where their applications to remain in the UK will be determined. The evidence suggests that a very high percentage of those applications are approved. There is a potential demand then on local services if those individuals remain within the community and then seek to make application.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Lane and then Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Chairman. What impact will providing 66 units on the local needs of the area proposed?
So this number is relatively low. It's government have set targets proportionate to the size of our population. So the impact is relatively low, but there is this will be at the expense of potentially accommodating people from within our local community, and we need to be transparent about that. This is a new obligation that has been placed upon the council by government. We are seen to be part of a wider system meeting the needs of asylum seekers that are in the UK.
Okay, Councillor Lever, then Councillor Clayton.
I think it's obviously important that people who've been through everything they've been through to land here in boats, whatever, are treated with kindness and compassion when they're staying in North Devon. But I just wondered if you looked at Clear Spring and you were comfortable that they would deal with people properly and there won't be any problems from that point of view.
The local authority is not responsible for the commissioning of Clear Springs. The local authority has experience of interacting with Clear Springs in relation to the contingency hotel that was operating in Ilfracombe. And you can be absolutely assured that in our surveillance of what happens within our community, if we see things that are good practice or things that are untoward, that we would be escalating those things very promptly to government.
Councillor Clayton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I understand what you're saying about transparency issues, but obviously this is going to be quite a difficult issue in North Devon, given what was said already about the housing situation. And Councillor May has already alluded to this. There could be particular right-wing people who make political hay out of this situation, because it could be seen that we are depriving people in North Devon of somewhere to live, we're giving it to asylum seekers. I understand what the government's rationale is in trying to disperse and spread out across the country, but let's not be under any illusion on this. This is something that can be quite firmly laid at the government's door, because they are the ones who have cut and cut as far as having the resources necessary to process these people coming from very unfortunate situations. And, you know, we have to get this message across. This could be done so differently. There could be a safer right of passage into this country where actual asylum seekers are treated straight away on arrival in this country, but it doesn't exist. And it worries me that we're going down a road here that could lead to real problems, and it could have been dealt with years ago by having the funding to look at all of these applications. But it's not there. If you speak to people who are responsible, they just haven't got the staff. And it's going to continue as long as the votes continue, which they will be doing, despite Tory government saying they're going to cut it to everybody. It is going to continue. And this is one where North Devon can help, but you're under no illusion. There's going to be problems stoked up by certain elements in society. We've got to be united standing against that, but also, you know, telling the government where the fault really lies, and they've got to speed up these applications. And people who are allowed to come here because of dangers of their own country should be allowed to, and those who aren't do have to go back. But there's no speedy process at the moment, and that's government's fault. Just a point.
I will just point out that within the report that we've got in front of us, the recommendation is straightforward, but Councillor Crowder and Councillor Ward.
Chair, we're drifting off the main thrust of the subject, but as we have drifted off, I'd just like to say that I believe everyone's aware that there are 1.3 billion people in abject poverty within walking distance of Europe. I've just wondered, you know, how swift Councillor Clayton would like the protest to be. You know,
It's in now. Don't you?
Sorry?
Do you not want to see it swifter?
No, not if 1.3 billion is coming, no. There are 1.3 billion people in poverty.
Right, okay then, okay, if you take that outside, Councillor Ward.
Right, yeah, fine. Okay, bearing in mind what's already been said about the asylum system, we have to do something towards the 66. And we have an empty property at the moment that I think would be ideal. And therefore, I'm quite happy to go along with the recommendation as proposed by Jeremy Mann this morning, that we actually use this particular property, the 7-bed property, and offer it to Clear Springs, because I think we have to be showing that we are willing to do something towards the target of 66, and this will be a good gesture, a good start, despite the fact that I agree that the asylum system at the moment is a mess, but that's another point.
So that's proposed, seconded Councillor Prowse.
Can I just say, it's important that these people are put in sustainable locations close to services, and this couldn't be a better option, so I support what David said.
All in favour? Any against? So all in favour, councillor Lane. Yes. Thank you for that. Now, item 11, urgent decisions taken by the chief executive, Ken.
This is just an item to note, Chair. There's only one decision on there, which was the introduction of the Household Support Fund, number 4. And it was taken, the decision was taken by myself because we needed to get payments starting to roll out in April. That's why I didn't come to committee. But the decision was taken in, after consultation with the leader and other relevant officers.
What's going on in April? Oh, I know.
Yeah.
When the scheme was in.
Some members can propose that we accept that.
Yeah.
Second, that
You don't need to vote on that, Chair, because you make us run.
Item 12, exclusion of press and public and restriction of documents recommended under items A and B. So we're going part B, confidential. Proposed, Councillor Lane, seconded Councillor Warden. All in favour of going part B? Thank you very much.
Give me a second, please. The name is not member of public that was.
The reporter.
Yes.
Anybody else on there?
Go. Yeah, you didn't look like that when you were actually in the public camera.
Not that he
Yeah, you were scribbling like that.
Well, the lens is clearly.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying.
This disappears.
Even the John sausages on the plaster.
Right, item 13. Item 13. Housing Management Company, page 85 to 120. Over to you, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Chair. As officers, we are quite excited by this opportunity. The Future High Streets Regeneration Programme in Barnstaple will bring forward 11 units of residential accommodation. This provides the council with an opportunity, and that opportunity is to retain the assets and potentially then become a direct provider of residential accommodation. Our suggestion here is that we don't seek to operate in competition with existing social landlords, but there's an opportunity here for us to provide accommodation that could meet wider housing needs within our community and also potentially provide ancillary benefits. So, for example, support the provision of accommodation where we see employers struggling with workforce deficits, and a number of local employers have made representation to us in that regard and are seeking our support. So for us to move forward and become a direct provider of accommodation, not social accommodation, but market accommodation for our wider strategic ambitions, we would need to set up a new entity, a wholly owned housing company. Simon has procured expert legal advice, and the expert legal advice is appended to this paper. The entity would most likely be a company limited by shares. That's the simplest configuration of a wholly owned company, as I understand it to be. It provides a simpler mechanism potentially for operating surpluses to be paid to the council through the provision of dividends. There is a simplicity of the contractual arrangements between the council and council's company. Establishing an entity, housing company, provides wider opportunities for the council moving forward to be more active in its ability to address housing needs, to increase the size of our portfolio, potentially beyond the properties that are will come forward in Bancock Street. We see opportunity to bring forward properties through our empty homes work identified in the report, through settled accommodation, through the use of local authority housing funds, which helps provide settled accommodation for people that are in North Devon from Ukraine. There's an opportunity for us here to operate an entity that makes profit, and that aspect of commercialisation could be really important in its own right for the council moving forward. There needs to be a transparency of proposal here if we're embarking to set up a housing company. It's wholly appropriate that we are that we advise central government of our direction of travel, and also it's appropriate for us to make sure that our internal and external audit bodies are appraised of what we're intending to do. The report that you have in front of you today is very much an enabling report. It is giving authority to the chief executive to move forward with the progression of this initiative. It will involve the provision of the procurement of further external advice to give us guidance in relation to things like the articles of association of the company, the precise relationship of the trading arm to the council. There is a second recommendation around requesting or asking full council then to give delegated authority to the chief executive to move forward with the appointment of a board of directors. That board of directors is likely to be quite small, recognising the nature of our entity as it kicks on. So for us, a really positive opportunity. If we don't move forward now with this enabling report, we could be in a situation when the properties come forward in the Bancock scheme that we don't have the opportunity to consider moving them into a trading arm because we've not undertaken this work at this time. So this is particularly timely in light of the regeneration scheme in Barnstaple. It will give the council wider opportunities, we think, moving forward. Thank you.
So members, as I see it, it's a very early stage of the process, and this is basically giving approval to go to give officers to go away, get more detail to bring back to us to say this is what we are proposing. The very baseline advice given that we've got to go if we want to release these properties to key workers or other entities as we may decide. And it gives that delegation power to officers to go away and to come back and say, this is what we're proposing. Is that the gist that have I made that very simply what it's all about?
Absolutely. We are following a path now that is not in any way unique. We see lots of examples across the country now of housing authorities, local authorities setting up trading arms for a whole manner of reasons. If we don't move forward now and set up this entity, we will not provide you with the opportunity then of retaining the assets, the residential assets in Bancock Street and putting them into a vehicle where we can operate as a landlord for market rent.
I've just got, I'll just bring Ken in and then I'll
yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's important to understand where members' comfort zone lies with this, because the recommendations as worded could allow officers to go off, set up the company, set up the board, and start running with it. And the reason for that is there is some urgency attached to it. If members are uncomfortable with that and want a further report to come back to them at the point just before we're ready to press the button and set it up, then I think members need to be clear about that, and then that can be minuted and we'll bring another report back. But as it's written at the moment, the intention was that we progress and we move ahead and set it up.
So as I understand it, the officers would go away and form this company, and did you know councillors on the board?
Oh, yeah, everybody of that.
Yeah, as I understand it.
Yeah, the whole issue about who sits on the board is still to be determined. You'll see from the legal advice, they're saying that this is a company that's really going to be operating at an operational level, really. And I think their suggestion is officers, again, if members are uncomfortable with that and want some member oversight on there, then again, we can include that.
I think that's important, but what we're not making that decision, are we, today?
That's what you need to determine. That's where I want you to be quite clear about, because if you want us to go off and in conjunction with yourself and the lead member for housing, do all the preparation work and get to the point where we're just about to press the button and run with it, and then another report come back, the final sign off, that's what you need to be clear about.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Lane?
Well, thank you, Chairman. And Chairman, I actually like this concept of what we're trying to achieve. And you talk about 11 units of accommodation, and you also talk about profit, I like to send that one. And you also talk about market rents. And how does that actually balance against the council's priorities by providing affordable housing in more Testament?
This is an initiative that is entirely complementary to the council's role as a strategic housing authority. So we will have, and we do have, strands of work that seek to bring forward social housing. Our work through the planning process, our work with community land trusts. We see opportunity here through this vehicle of an extended ability to meet housing need and to deliver wider benefits, economic benefits to our community. So, as I say, it's additional, but I think entirely complementary and entirely appropriate for us as a strategic housing authority.
Chair, can I just jump in on because as the lead member for what's going on in Battle Street, Ricewood, when we were sold the model, we weren't sold the model, we actually bought the model, didn't we? And where we borrowed some money to match government funding on a certain basis, and the basis was that we would retain so many units to give us the rental stream to pay back the borrowing. And that is a priority too of the district council as well as housing, just to answer, clear on councillor Lane. So I think that is important, and there are other opportunities in Barnstable where regeneration and housing are to be balanced together. But in this one, that was the basis of us going ahead with the regeneration scheme in Barnstable, that we would have rental streams to pay back the borrowing.
Right. I've got councillor Lee, and then I'll bring Karen.
Can I just come back?
Yeah, go
Can I just come back? I agree with coming from with that then, but I think you can't make one statement about the priorities of them, affordable housing, and then start charging market rents for something you actually own yourself.
Well, they're not conflicting, we've got more than one priority.
In all fairness, if you move them forward, of course, with small properties, because that's what you're trying to set up was. Now, the other properties you would be looking to hold forward was, would they also fall in the same category as the market rented properties? Or would they be able to be what is known to be affordable housing, more than people?
Ben wants to, sorry, Jim, I just jump in. What the work that we've done through the housing programme has shown us that there's a housing demand across the board. So there is a demand for affordable housing, as you say, but there's also a demand, as was identified through the short-term holiday let stuff that we were looking at earlier. There's a demand for market rental properties to support local employers as well. So we've been having conversations with some of the major employers in the area who are saying that they can't attract employees to the area because of the housing situation, because the lack of the lack of available housing. So this scheme that we're talking about would satisfy that demand. That's not to say that there isn't a demand for affordable housing. And for instance, on the Seven Brethren scheme that we've got up and running, we're going for 30% affordable on that scheme, which provides 50 odd affordable houses, which are pure affordable houses. So it's about balancing the demand and making sure you try and satisfy demand where it rises. But certainly through the housing work that we've done, there is an acute demand for market housing in Barnstaple to support local employers, etc. The NHS is crying out for it. They can't attract doctors, nurses, etc. because of the lack of available housing. So what we're looking to do as part of this is satisfy that demand as well as satisfying other demand as well. So it's difficult to say, if we get other properties through perhaps empty home management orders, what we would use those for, they may well be affordable, but that's the decision to be taken for later in the day. This vehicle allows us that flexibility to be able to let properties at affordable rents, at market rents, below market rents. It allows us that flexibility to take that decision in relation to each particular scheme.
I'll be taken on board. Thank you.
Right, yeah. So I've got councillor Biederman, councillor Lever, councillor Clayton, and councillor everyone else.
It's current.
Yeah, well,
I was hoping to move along quickly, Chair.
yeah, but just before you say, Frank, basically, for new councillors, I'm sure you already know this, but obviously what's said in this room remains in this room because we are in Part B, so we can't go out there and do any tweeting or all that. It's all confidential, yeah. Councillor Biederman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was hoping to move along, because I think one of the questions that Mr. Mann asked us was, or the chief executive was actually, do you want to report back before the press the go button? I think from what we've heard, we do, don't we? It's really exciting. There's lots of opportunity, but I think it would be useful to get, for me personally, get a report back, because it's quite a lot to take in. I couldn't quite get into this over the weekend and only got into it this morning because I couldn't find my password to my private bit. So I've not read through the whole document, if I'm honest, so I would like a report back. I think you're right, it's absolutely an exciting opportunity. I think there's a tiptoe into it with the things going on at Bagwell Street with opportunities coming forward. And I think you're right, it's not just about affordable homes, it's about the wider economy in North Devon. So I've certainly heard from businesses in my time on the council where they've said, all well and good, we've got this opportunity, but when we employ somebody, and then suddenly they don't take up the employment because there's no housing. So I think it does need to be a wider thing with the principle of supporting our local people. So I'd just like to know when the report comes back, how the board is made up. I think it does need to be member involvement. I think it certainly needs to be member scrutiny of the board and just how that structure works. For me, so I think it's it'll be us that appear on. We're in private now. It will be us ultimately on the front of the North Devon Journal. When anything goes wrong, they don't tend to want to tell everybody what it is.
And Frank, you will know what I'm on about.
Yeah.
And this is very confidential in this room. There are situations that me and Frank are involved with through county being on an outside body where they're having problems because of that member involvement and scrutiny on another outside bit. So that's why I think there should be member involvement on the board and for scrutiny wise. So, Councillor Leader.
I wholeheartedly support the idea of having an arm's length company, trading arm to manage the properties on Bagwell Street. I again would like something to come back to us on this before you're ready to go, because I think there seems to be just a bit of confusion about what the business model for this company is. If what we're doing is we're seeking to intervene in the private sector housing market in order to provide good quality long-term rented accommodation that hasn't got all of the problems we spent all morning talking about, and we're looking at providing accommodation for key workers, then it seems to me there needs to be a business model that looks at where that need is and actively targets those areas rather than picking up the odd empty home as it becomes available. I think there's two different models. There's a model that deals with property that becomes available to the council as and when that it lets out to key workers. And there's a model that actively intervenes in the housing market in areas of need. I mean, we're not seeking to replace North Devon Homes or the other social housing providers. As I understand it, this is housing for people who will never get onto the top band of the housing list and will never be offered social rented housing through one of the providers. So I think the composition of the board is very much going to be dictated by what sort of housing model you go for. And I would, obviously as Councillor Biedman said, our names on the front of the newspaper when Woking happens and we're £2 billion in debt because of this. So I think we do need some political representation on there. But I also wonder if it's worth widening it out beyond officers and councillors to people in the housing and property market in North Devon who might want to take an interest in this and certainly would know that market probably better than realistically any of us in this room.
Can I just come back on that, Chair, as I see it anyway, there's two stages to this. And Jeremy mentioned about dipping the toe in the water with available street properties. That's where we want to start. Whether we get to the, suddenly we're owning 300 properties and we're, a major player in the local market, I doubt very much whether we'll get to that stage. The difficulty that we've got, if we take those available street properties as an example, if we retain ownership of those without setting up a vehicle such as this, then our lettings will be subject to right to buy, and we'll also have the obligation to only look at the housing list and let on social rents, etc. So it wouldn't achieve what we want it to achieve. And as Councillor Price said, we also have an obligation because in the business case for future high streets, we talked about letting these properties at a market rent. So this vehicle achieves that objective initially. I think probably it can go a little bit further than that. And that's when we talked about, taking on properties. If we've got empty home properties, for instance, empty home property management orders, whatever they're called, if they fall into our lap, then again, we could manage them through this process. But at this stage, I don't think we're talking about going out and purchasing a whole load of properties purely to manage through this company. It's taking those opportunities as and when they arise, when those properties fall into our lap. So in terms of a business case, fully accept that if we're going to go with the all guns blazing approach, then we would need to come to members with a business case. We could probably use exactly the same vehicle, but it would be a complete change of approach. At the moment, this is just about managing the handful of properties that we'll achieve through future high streets and any other.
Yes, just a supplementary to that, I understand that, but I'd like to see a report come back. I mean, this is a legal case for setting up a company, which is great, and I'd love to say I understand all of it. But I think it would be good for you to come back with a business case, even given quite a small, this sort of smaller setup, just so that we know what we're talking about and we know what our financial risks are, not our liabilities.
Yeah, I think that's acceptable. I'll take it on board, and we can come back with a report just before the go button is pressed, Jeff.
Right, okay, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. I didn't really get the rationale for the management of the board, the personnel of the board being non-council involvement. It's an arm's length organisation. There are arm's length housing organisations across the country that do have councillor member input and should have, because it's such an important issue. So I would like to propose that going forward, that certainly the lead member for housing is involved and a member of the board. Whether we want anybody else, we understand also the need to keep it quite small to get progress, to achieve progress. And I think having one member certainly on the board possibly a substitute, rather than member of council attend any meetings. So my proposal is that the
recommendation
membership of the board should involve the lead member for housing.
That's fine, Chair. I mean, again, we picked that up, I think, from the discussion. The reason for the that came through from the leader team that this was because they see it as purely operational. And that's based on that's based on the information we've told them. I think we've said, you know, we're not going to be going out there buying a whole load of properties. So there's not going to be those big strategic decisions to make as to where these properties are and how many, etc. This is just about managing those properties that fall into our lap. And if it wasn't for the legislative restrictions that we've got at the moment, we'd just do it through the existing team that we've got. And there'd be no dramas. But because of the restrictions we've got about right to buy, etc., we've got to do it through a separate vehicle to ensure that those things don't leak in. But a member on the board, yeah, that's fine. I mean, we've got local authority owned company ourselves at the moment, North Devon Plus with membership or councillors on the board. And that's not.
I think the leader needs also to be on the board, the lead, as in the recommendation here, mainly because of the strategic outlook on the whole council. It's not just an housing issue, about everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's leader and lead member then.
Yeah, that's right. So are we all happy? Anybody got any more questions? It's basically go away and sort it out. One. Please, Councillor Knight, sorry, Councillor Knight.
Yeah, councillor Ricky Knight. It's 10-1, so to make this brief. I'm quite inspired by this, even though I'm very much a layman on this, and I don't have to phone up and catch up with Graham on this housing crisis group because it's such a crucial area. I have a memory, as I know a lot of you do, that many, many years ago, this council's housing stock was essentially privatised. And I also know, as we all do, and I don't want to make an ideological political point here, but that the loss of our council housing stock has been an unintended consequences, has been disastrous for the vote which you've been trying to address here. I'm not going to put this on Twitter just yet, you're right, but I don't know how to use Twitter. Can this be used to our advantage as being like a return or something? A return to us being in charge of North Devon Council being in charge of council housing again. I don't word it like that, but that's how I see it.
So the Chief Executive made a really good point in that once you have a vehicle, the flexibility is yours. So you could run an entity that operated for profit. You could provide an element of subsidised rent. All of that flexibility exists once you set up the entity. So the wider economic and social aspirations are facilitated by having the entity. It's your local lettings policy which determines the business case that underpins it, which determines how the company operates moving forward. So it could operate to meet wider social aspiration.
And supplementary would be, judging by the comments today, which have been that we have a lot of expertise in the council here, not from me, but from others. So yeah, I also support that angle. You've already addressed, Ken.
Thank you. So Ken, can you reply back to what you were going to propose?
Yeah.
Oh, Graham, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. Are we happy that the council has the human resources to manage this? I understand that there is a problem at the moment, and the time to ensure that we're with new roles adequately trained up. So realistically, the spread is thin. It's a high quality spread, but over a lot of bread. Can we add another slice like this? And will we have the additional skills we need, the additional training we need in order to make all this a success? So Ian isn't on the journal.
No, you'll leave that.
I'm working that day.
In terms of resources, yeah, we've got to work through what the resource requirement is going to be. For the 11 properties, I think it was 11, wasn't it, in Bakewell Street, the business case that went to members to approve the future high street scheme dealt with that. So hopefully we can manage that within existing resources, but things have changed since then anyway, so we'll have to look at that to make sure we have it with the resources. But you know, where we need the resources to be able to do that, then we'll have to bring people in. But we'll go through that process as part of this. This really was a report to kick it off. We know we've got an end date, which is when the future high streets probably come on stream. That's what we need to aim for. We need to have it in place by then if we're going to use this vehicle. But we know we've got a few steps to do before we get to that stage, and that is the purpose of this report, really, to make sure members are comfortable with it before we go committee.
Ken, do you want us just to summarise the recommendation?
As I understand it, the recommendation is on the paperwork, but with two caveats. One is that the final report comes back to members before we go ahead with it, and that there be councillor involvement on the board. I think the leader and also the lead member have been mentioned.
Okay. Thank you very much. All in favour?
Well, I am a bit worried about the street side of it, Chair, I don't know.
Well, we'll
whether
do that
that
also.
also, can we see how?
I mean, I know everyone's clamouring to get on the board, but if
That's why I'm thinking if there's no need for everybody to be on the board, it's on the street
board,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be taking a huge number of strategic decisions or anything.
You
Like I
could
said,
potentially in time. I
it
think.
might, yeah, if members then choose to broaden its approach.
Frank, I know where you're coming from.
Will it be the policy committee that would scrutinise the board? I don't want to be on the board, I assume most councillors will, but if people want to have a sight of it and what's going on.
I mean, we can have a think about how we have the quarterly business reports that come to members. And it may well be that we can integrate something into that, which shows how many properties it runs, and what the rental income, et cetera, and costs. So we could look at something like that as part of that standard reporting approach.
Councillor Lane?
Am I assuming that the chief exec will be on the board?
Yes.
No.
No.
Well, I think.
That's not an assumption to make at the
Well,
moment.
I would suggest that the chief exec should be on the board as well, because it's something which is being done by the council. Chief exec should be on the board.
Yes, definitely.
Can I just say, I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves.
It's not, no, because I think you need to set the parameters if you want to move forward.
The important thing is to have people on the board that know what they're doing.
Well, they cannot.
And
It comes to
when it comes to developments, and I may not be the right person. So we need to look at what skills we need on the board, and get the right appropriate people on.
I've got Mr. Triggs and then Mr. Mann.
Yeah, thank you. Just add on to.
And I was just trying to wrap it all up.
Yeah, you're doing well. In terms of the performance, the financial performance would also be incorporated in the council's accounts. Because even though it'd be a separate company, we have to bring those group accounts into the council's accounts. So there will be scrutiny of the financial detail and alongside how the operation of the.
That's the bit, I just want to see that.
Yeah,
the street.
we can map
We can
that.
map that out, maybe clearer the metrical.
Councillor Mann, last. No.
Terry, it's a simple point as regards the constitution of the board. We need to be really careful that we don't establish conflicts of interest. So the chief exec obviously has a fairly significant role, corporate oversight of the council. And it may be more appropriate then for other officers to be on the board. So the chief executive then can oversee that kind of wider scrutiny role of the whole shooting.
We'll look forward to seeing the report.
Yeah.
All those in favour of the recommendation as heard? That's unanimous. Thank you very much.